At 6:32 on a Thursday evening, Naomi Carter was thinking about groceries. Not love, not billionaires, not the past. And definitely not the man who would eventually force her to confront all three. She was thinking about whether she had enough money left on her debit card to buy milk, bread, and the cheap cereal Sophie liked. That was what life had become lately. Not dramatic, not tragic. Just a constant series of small calculations. Naomi sat behind the wheel of her 11-year-old Honda, one hand resting on the steering wheel while the other tapped impatiently against her thigh. The traffic ahead was barely moving. Rain had started falling against the windshield, soft at first, then harder. In the back seat, 8-year-old Sophie Carter was humming along to a song playing quietly from the radio. "Mom? Yeah? Can we get the strawberry cereal?" Naomi smiled. "The one that's basically sugar pretending to be breakfast?" Sophie giggled. "Yes. Absolutely not. You didn't even think about it. I've thought about it every time you've asked for the last 3 weeks. But you always say no." Exactly. Consistency is an important parenting skill. Sophie laughed. For a moment, Naomi smiled too. It wasn't much, but lately, small moments of peace were the closest thing she had to luxury. She glanced at the dashboard. The fuel gauge was approaching empty. Her phone showed 3 missed notifications. One from her landlord, one from her bank, and one from the school reminding parents about an upcoming field trip. Naomi exhaled slowly. She didn't open any of them. Not yet. She just wanted 5 quiet minutes. 5 minutes where she didn't have to solve something. 5 minutes where nobody needed money. Nobody needed an answer. Nobody needed her to be strong. She turned the radio down. The rain became louder. Then, click. The dashboard lights flickered. Naomi frowned. What was that? Sophie stopped humming. What? I don't know. The car jerked. Once. Then again. Naomi tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Come on. The engine coughed. She pressed the accelerator. Nothing. The Honda began losing speed. Mom? It's okay. Naomi guided the car toward the shoulder. It's okay, sweetheart. The engine coughed again, then died. Silence. Naomi stared through the windshield. Cars continued rushing past them, tires spraying water into the air. She tried the ignition. Nothing. Again. Nothing. A third time. Still nothing. Naomi leaned back against the seat. For several seconds, she simply stared at the rain. Then she whispered the words she had become almost too familiar with. We'll figure it out. Sophie looked at her mother. You always say that. Naomi turned around. Because it's true. But this time, her voice didn't sound convincing. She reached for her phone. 4% battery. She called roadside assistance. The automated voice informed her that the estimated wait time was 45 minutes. Naomi closed her eyes. 45 minutes. She looked at Sophie. Then, at the rain. Then, at the empty road ahead. She wasn't afraid. Not exactly. She was just tired. Tired of every inconvenience becoming a crisis because there was nobody else to call. Tired of having to calculate whether a broken car meant missing work. Whether missing work meant missing rent. Whether missing rent meant explaining to Sophie why they had to move again. She rubbed her forehead. Mom? Yeah? Are we stuck? Naomi looked at her daughter's worried face. No. She smiled. We're just waiting. But life had a strange way of disguising turning points as ordinary inconveniences. Naomi didn't know it yet, but this broken-down car wasn't going to be the worst thing that happened to her that year. It was going to be the beginning. Because 20 minutes later, a black SUV would pull onto the shoulder. A tall stranger would step out into the rain. And a man Naomi believed she had every reason to distrust would offer her help without asking for anything in return. His name was Alexander Reed, billionaire, businessman, and, unknowingly, the man connected to the most painful chapter of Naomi's past. But before that night was over, Alexander would discover something money had never taught him. Sometimes, the person you think you're rescuing is actually the person who will teach you how to stop trying to rescue everyone. And Naomi? She would discover that accepting help didn't always mean surrendering control. Sometimes it simply meant allowing another human being to stand beside you. But neither of them was ready for what would happen next. Because when Alexander opened the door of his SUV and stepped into the rain, he thought he was helping a stranded mother. He had no idea he was walking directly into his own past. And if you're watching this story right now, I want you to remember something. How many times have you pushed away help because you were afraid of what accepting it might cost you? Have you ever convinced yourself that doing everything alone was the only way to stay safe? If that sounds familiar, stay with me. Because Naomi's story isn't simply about a billionaire falling for a single mother. It's about 2 imperfect people discovering that love doesn't require you to fix another person, and healing doesn't happen on the same schedule for everyone. So, before we continue, welcome to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. If you're new here, we're glad you found us. And if you've been with us before, welcome back. Please take a second to subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications, and stay until the end of Naomi and Alexander's story. Because the stranger who was about to stop beside her car wasn't just going to change her evening. He was going to reopen a door she had spent 8 years trying to keep closed. The rain intensified. Naomi looked into the side mirror. A pair of headlights slowed behind her. She watched as the vehicle pulled onto the shoulder. Her heart began beating faster. The black SUV stopped several yards behind her. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. And Naomi immediately locked the doors. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his intentions. But something about the way he walked toward her car made her realize that her quiet Thursday evening had just become something else entirely. Alexander Reed stopped several feet from her window. He didn't knock. He didn't wave. He simply stood there in the rain. Then he raised one hand. Not demanding. Not impatient. Just asking. Naomi lowered the window barely an inch. "Can I help you?" The stranger looked at the dead Honda, then at Naomi, then toward the back seat where Sophie was watching him carefully. "That's what I was going to ask you." Naomi's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "We're fine." Alexander glanced at the rain pouring around them, then back at her. "Of course you are." There was no sarcasm in his voice, just a quiet understanding. And somehow, that made Naomi more uncomfortable than if he had argued. Because for the first time that evening, someone wasn't trying to tell her she couldn't handle things. He was simply offering her a choice. And Naomi had spent years learning that choices could be dangerous. Especially when they came from people with power. Especially when those people carried names she had tried very hard to forget. Naomi kept the window open only an inch. It wasn't enough for a normal conversation. That was intentional. She had learned a long time ago that being polite and being accessible were two different things. The man standing outside her car didn't seem offended. He simply nodded toward the dashboard. "Engine trouble?" Naomi looked at him. "Apparently." "Did you call someone?" "Roadside assistance." "How long?" "They said 45 minutes. The stranger glanced toward the highway. Rainwater ran down the side of his face, but he didn't seem bothered by it. "That's a long time to wait with a child." Naomi's expression hardened slightly. "We'll manage." He nodded. "I believe you." Something about the answer caught her off guard. Most people didn't say that. Most people heard a woman say she could manage and immediately decided she couldn't. They would tell her what to do, where to go, who to call, what she should have done differently. This man simply accepted her answer. Then he reached into his coat pocket. "I can call my driver." "I don't need a ride." "I didn't offer one." Naomi blinked. The man almost smiled. "I was going to offer you an umbrella." He pointed toward his SUV. Naomi glanced at the vehicle. It was large, black, and expensive enough to probably cost more than her entire house. She looked back at him. "You're not a serial killer, are you?" For the first time, the man laughed. It was brief, surprised. "No. That's exactly what a serial killer would say." "Fair point." Naomi almost smiled. Almost. From the back seat, Sophie leaned forward. "Mom?" "What?" "He's getting wet." Naomi sighed. She looked at the stranger. "Do you have an umbrella?" "I do." "Put it on the hood." He nodded. "Okay." He walked back to his SUV. Naomi watched him through the windshield. He returned with a large black umbrella and placed it carefully on the hood of her car. Then he stepped away. No attempt to hand it to her. No request for her name. No insistence that she let him inside. Just an umbrella. Naomi lowered the window another inch. "Thank you." "You're welcome." He started walking back toward his SUV, then stopped. He turned around. "If your battery is dead, I can jump it." "It's not the battery." "How do you know?" "Because I know my car." The man nodded. "Fair enough." He turned away again. Naomi watched him disappear behind the SUV. Sophie whispered, "He's nice." "You don't know that." "He gave us an umbrella." "Serial killers can own umbrellas." Sophie giggled. Naomi shook her head. "Mom?" "Yes?" "What's his name?" Naomi looked toward the SUV. "I don't know." As if he'd heard her, the man opened his driver's door. Then he paused. He looked back at them. "Alexander." Naomi frowned. "What? My name?" She nodded. "Okay. Just so you don't have to keep calling me the stranger." Sophie smiled. "I'm Sophie." Alexander looked toward the little girl. "Nice to meet you, Sophie." "Nice to meet you." Naomi sighed. "She talks to everybody." Alexander smiled. "That's usually a good quality." Until she gives our address to one of them. Sophie frowned. I don't do that. Last month, you told the grocery delivery guy where your school was. He asked. Alexander laughed. Naomi caught herself smiling. It disappeared quickly. She wasn't comfortable with how easy the conversation felt. She had met men before who were charming. Some had been charming precisely because they wanted something. She had learned not to confuse pleasantness with character. Alexander seemed to understand the boundary. He returned to his SUV. Naomi expected him to leave. He didn't. Instead, he remained parked several yards behind them. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Naomi looked in her rearview mirror. The SUV was still there. She finally called roadside assistance again. Still 40 minutes, the representative told her. Naomi closed her eyes. Of course. She opened her banking app. Her available balance stared back at her. She quickly closed it. She didn't want to think about the repair bill. She didn't want to think about the rent. She didn't want to think about the email from her daughter's school. She certainly didn't want to think about the job interview she had tomorrow. A job she desperately needed. A job that paid enough to make things easier. Maybe not comfortable. Just easier. She looked at Sophie. The little girl had fallen asleep. Naomi lowered the seat slightly so Sophie could rest. Then she stared through the windshield. She remembered something her father used to say. Money doesn't make a person powerful, Naomi. What they do with it does. She had been 26 when he said it. Back then, she hadn't understood. Now she did. Power wasn't just money. Power was deciding who got heard, who got opportunities, who got another chance, and who didn't. Her father had lost his job 8 years earlier. At the time, Naomi had been working at the same company. The company had been acquired by a larger corporation. The executives called it restructuring. They used words like efficiency, optimization, strategic realignment. Naomi remembered those words. She also remembered the day her father came home and sat silently at the kitchen table. He hadn't cried. Her father wasn't a crying man. He had simply stared at his hands. They let me go, he'd said. Naomi had been furious. Why? He had shrugged. They said the position was redundant. Redundant. She hated that word. Because people weren't redundant. Jobs could be. Systems could be. Departments could be. But people had rent, families, dreams, medical bills, children, lives. And yet, corporations had a way of making destruction sound clean. Naomi shook her head. She hadn't thought about that night in months, maybe years. She didn't want to think about it now, especially not while sitting beside a stranger in a luxury SUV. She glanced at Alexander again. He was inside his vehicle, looking at his phone. Then she noticed something. A man in a suit had stepped out of the passenger side. He walked toward Alexander's window. They spoke briefly. The man handed Alexander a tablet. Alexander looked at it, then shook his head. The suited man returned to the SUV. Naomi frowned. She hadn't noticed a driver earlier. She looked again. The expensive SUV suddenly made more sense. Alexander wasn't just some wealthy man. He was probably important. Very important. She looked away. She didn't need wealthy people's problems becoming hers. She had enough of her own. 20 minutes later, the tow truck finally arrived. Naomi stepped out of the car. Rain immediately soaked her jacket. She opened the back door and helped Sophie out. Alexander also stepped from his SUV. He walked over, but stopped several feet away. Looks like they're here. Naomi nodded. Finally. The tow truck driver examined the car. Alternator, he said. Naomi's stomach sank. How much? The mechanic gave her an estimate. She stared at the number. It wasn't impossible. But it wasn't comfortable either. Not even close. Alexander noticed her expression. He didn't say anything. That mattered. He could have offered money. He could have said, I'll take care of it. He didn't. Instead, he simply asked, Do you have a way home? Yes. Naomi lied. She had a bus route. It would take over an hour. With Sophie. In the rain. Alexander looked at her. He seemed to know she wasn't telling the whole truth. But he didn't expose her. My driver can take you. No. You don't have to ride with me. Naomi hesitated. My driver can take you and your daughter home. I said no. Alexander nodded. Okay. He turned toward his SUV. Then Naomi stopped him. Wait. He looked back. She swallowed. How far are you going? Don't tell. I'm going to Westbridge. That's on the way. Naomi looked at him suspiciously. Are you sure? Yes. She hesitated again. Her pride told her to refuse. Her exhausted body told her to accept. Eventually, she nodded. Fine. Alexander smiled slightly. Okay. He walked back toward the SUV. Naomi followed with Sophie. As they approached, the passenger door opened. The suited driver stepped out. "Good evening." "Hi." He opened the rear door. Sophie climbed in first. Naomi followed. Alexander got into the front passenger seat. The doors closed. For the first time all evening, Naomi was warm. She looked out the window as the tow truck pulled away with her Honda. Her car disappeared into the rain. She felt strangely exposed. That old vehicle had been frustrating, unreliable, expensive, but it had also been hers. Something she had managed to keep running despite everything. Now she was sitting inside a vehicle that probably cost more than she had earned in several years. She didn't like the feeling. Alexander looked at her through the rearview mirror. "You okay?" Naomi nodded. "Yes." "You don't look okay." She looked at him. "I said I'm okay." He nodded. "All right." No argument, no lecture, no attempt to force her to talk. Naomi looked out the window again. She didn't know why that bothered her. Maybe because she was accustomed to people trying to fix her. Alexander didn't. At least not yet. The SUV stopped outside her apartment building 40 minutes later. Naomi opened the door. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Sophie looked toward Alexander. "Are you rich?" Naomi's eyes widened. "Sophie? What? He is?" Alexander smiled. "Why do you think I'm rich?" "You have a car with a television." Naomi covered her face. Alexander laughed. "That's fair." Sophie leaned toward him. "Are you?" Alexander glanced at Naomi, then back at Sophie. "I've done pretty well." Naomi stepped out. "Sophie, say thank you, and come on." "Thank you, Alexander." "You're welcome." Naomi closed the door. She took 3 steps toward the building, then stopped. She turned around. Alexander was still watching her through the window. Their eyes met. For a second, neither moved. Then Naomi gave him a small nod. The SUV drove away. She watched the taillights disappear. She didn't know who Alexander Reed was. She didn't know that his company was one of the largest technology investment firms in the country. She didn't know that he had been featured on magazine covers. She didn't know that his decisions affected thousands of employees. And she certainly didn't know that the name Alexander Reed had appeared in an old corporate document, sitting in a locked archive 8 years ago. A document Naomi had never seen. A document that contained the reason her father's life had changed. The next morning, Naomi walked into a glass building wearing her only Navy business suit. She had spent 30 minutes getting Sophie ready. 20 minutes finding a babysitter. 10 minutes arguing with herself about whether she should even attend the interview. She nearly turned around twice, but she needed the job. So she walked through the revolving doors. The receptionist smiled. "Good morning. Name?" "Naomi Carter. I'm here for an interview." The receptionist checked the computer. "Yes, Mr. Reed is expecting you." Naomi froze. "Mr. Reed?" "Alexander Reed." Her heart stopped for half a second. The same Alexander from the highway. She looked toward the elevators, then back at the receptionist. "You said Mr. Reed?" "Yes." Naomi slowly exhaled. Of course, the one man who had stopped to help her last night had to be the billionaire who owned the company where she was interviewing. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Her reflection stared back at her. She looked tired, but determined. The elevator climbed, floor after floor. When the doors finally opened, a receptionist led her into a conference room. Alexander was standing beside the window. He turned. Their eyes met. His expression changed, not because he was surprised to see her, because he was remembering something. "Naomi Carter," he said. She nodded. "Mr. Reed." He studied her resume, then looked back at her. "You worked for Hartwell Manufacturing." Naomi's face went still. "Yes." "When?" 8 years ago." Alexander slowly lowered the resume. Something about the answer bothered him. He walked toward the table. "Hartwell was acquired by Reed Technologies 8 years ago." "I know. You were there when it happened." "I was." Silence. Alexander looked at her. Naomi looked back. Neither understood the full significance of the moment. Not yet. But Alexander remembered the acquisition. He remembered the board meetings, the layoffs, the legal reports, the signatures, and one name in particular, Daniel Carter, Naomi's father. Alexander's expression tightened. Naomi noticed. "What?" He shook his head. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Because for the first time in 8 years, Alexander realized the woman sitting across from him wasn't just connected to his company's past. She was connected to his. And the past he thought he had buried was about to become personal. Before we continue with Naomi and Alexander's story, I want to hear from you. If you were Naomi, would you accept help from a stranger who seemed genuine, even if you had learned from the past not to trust powerful people? Tell me what you would do in the comments. I'd genuinely love to hear your perspective. And if this story is already pulling you in, please like this video, share it with someone who enjoys emotional love stories, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, because this was only the beginning. Alexander thought he had helped a stranded single mother on a rainy evening. He had no idea that woman was connected to a decision from his past, and that uncovering the truth would force him to confront the kind of man he had become. Stay with us, because the deeper Alexander digs into Naomi's past, the more he realizes that some mistakes don't disappear simply because you stop talking about them. Alexander Reed had sat across from hundreds of people in conference rooms like this one. Executives, politicians, investors, lawyers, people who wanted something from him, and people who were afraid of what he could take away. He had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without raising his voice. He had fired senior executives while maintaining the same calm expression he wore during dinner. He had learned early that hesitation made people uncomfortable. Certainty made them listen. But sitting across from Naomi Carter, Alexander suddenly wasn't certain of anything, not even what to say. Naomi noticed the silence. She slowly pulled out the chair opposite him. "Is there a problem?" Alexander looked down at her resume. "Not with you." "Then what?" He hesitated. That alone was unusual. Naomi folded her hands in her lap. "Mr. Reed?" Alexander finally sat down. "You worked in accounting at Hartwell Manufacturing." "Yes. Your father worked there too." Naomi's expression changed, only slightly. But Alexander saw it. "How do you know that?" "I've seen his name in company records." She studied him. "What records?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. 8 years earlier, Hartwell Manufacturing had been struggling. The company had been losing money for 3 consecutive quarters. Its leadership had requested a restructuring package. Reed Technologies had stepped in. Alexander had been 31, young enough to believe that numbers told the complete story, old enough to have already learned how quickly people judged a business leader by his decisions. The acquisition had been presented to him as a strategic opportunity. Hartwell had valuable patents, a strong customer base, experienced employees, but the company was inefficient. Too many departments, too much overhead, too many outdated processes. The board had approved a restructuring plan. Alexander had signed the final documents. Within 6 months, hundreds of employees had been dismissed, including Daniel Carter, Naomi's father. Alexander remembered none of the employees personally. That was the uncomfortable truth. He remembered the number. 417 positions eliminated, but he didn't remember their faces, until now. Naomi looked at him. "My father was fired 3 months after the acquisition." Alexander nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." She almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the words sounded too small. "Are you?" Alexander looked at her. "Yes. You don't even know what happened." "You're right. Then why say you're sorry?" He paused. Because she had asked him a question most people never asked. What did an apology mean if you didn't understand the damage? Alexander leaned back. "I shouldn't have assumed I knew enough to apologize." Naomi's expression softened for half a second, then hardened again. "My father never recovered." Alexander said nothing. He was 58 when they let him go. He had worked there for 32 years. She looked toward the window. He had planned to retire at 65. Alexander listened. "He had a mortgage. My mother was already dealing with health problems. My younger brother was in college." She swallowed. "After the acquisition, everything changed." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Did he find another job?" "Eventually." "Where?" "A warehouse." Alexander frowned. He went from managing a department to working overnight shifts. Naomi looked back at him. "Do you know what that does to a person's dignity?" Alexander didn't answer. She continued. "He stopped talking at dinner. He stopped going to church. He stopped seeing his friends." Her voice remained steady. That made it harder to hear. 1 year later, he had a heart attack. Alexander's eyes lowered. "I'm sorry." This time, Naomi didn't challenge him. She simply said, "He survived." Alexander looked up. But he was never the same. Silence filled the room. Outside the glass walls, employees moved through the hallway carrying laptops and coffee. The company continued functioning. People were answering emails. Meetings were happening. Numbers were being calculated. The world hadn't stopped, because one family had been changed 8 years earlier. That was the strange cruelty of corporate decisions. The people who made them moved on. The people affected by them sometimes didn't. Alexander stood and walked toward the window. He remembered the acquisition presentation, the executive who had briefed him, the charts, the projections, the promised savings. He remembered asking one question. "Are the layoffs necessary?" The executive had answered immediately. "Unfortunately, yes." Alexander had believed him. Now he wondered whether he should have asked another question. Who benefits? Naomi gathered her resume. I don't think I should take this job. Alexander turned. Why? She gave him a tired smile. Because I don't think working for the man who signed the papers that changed my father's life is a good career move. Alexander absorbed the statement. I didn't know. I know. That doesn't excuse it. I know that too. She stood. Alexander walked toward the table. Naomi. She stopped. I want to understand what happened. She looked at him. You had 8 years to understand. The words landed harder than an accusation, because she was right. Alexander had never looked closely. He had reviewed the final numbers. He had monitored the acquisition's profitability. He had listened to legal counsel. He had congratulated himself when the company became profitable again. But he had never asked what happened to Daniel Carter. Not personally, not deeply, not beyond a line on a report. Naomi walked toward the door. Alexander followed. Would you be willing to meet again? For what? To talk. She gave him a skeptical look. You want to talk about my father? I want to understand. Understanding won't change anything. No. Alexander nodded. But it might change what I do next. Naomi stopped. For a moment, she seemed to consider it. Then she shook her head. I don't know. That's fair. She opened the door. Thank you for the ride last night. You're welcome. She walked away. Alexander watched until the elevator doors closed behind her. Then he returned to the conference room. He stood alone. For several minutes, he didn't move. Then he picked up the phone. Claire? His chief legal officer answered. Yes? I need the complete Hartwell acquisition file. There was a pause. The old one? Yes. Why? I want everything. How far back? From the initial due diligence. Another pause. Alexander, that's 8 years of records. I know. Is there a problem? He looked toward the closed conference room door. Possibly. With the acquisition? I don't know yet. Claire's tone became more serious. Do you want me to pull the archived legal documents? Yes. Everything? Everything. Okay. He ended the call. Then he stood there, staring at the city outside his window. For years, Alexander had believed success meant learning how to move forward without looking backward. He was beginning to understand that sometimes moving forward required the courage to look directly at what you'd left behind. 2 hours later, a thick digital archive appeared on Alexander's computer. Hartwell Manufacturing. Acquisition date, March 14th. Year, 8 years earlier. He opened the first document. Financial summary, nothing unusual. Next, employee restructuring plan. He scanned the numbers. Next, board authorization. Next, executive recommendation. Alexander stopped. The recommendation had been prepared by Richard Voss, Hartwell's chief operating officer. Alexander remembered Richard. Experienced, confident, persuasive. Richard had been the person who told Alexander that Hartwell's workforce was severely overstaffed. He had recommended eliminating several departments. Alexander had accepted the assessment. He opened the supporting report. His eyes narrowed. The numbers didn't quite match. He checked another document, then another. Something was wrong. The financial projections used to justify the restructuring were different from the projections submitted to the board 2 weeks earlier. Alexander opened both files side by side. The discrepancy wasn't huge, but it mattered. The earlier projection showed Hartwell recovering within 18 months. The later report showed the company remaining unprofitable without major layoffs. Alexander stared at the screen. Why had the numbers changed? He opened the approval chain. Richard Voss, then the CFO, then Alexander. Alexander leaned back. His stomach tightened. He had signed based on information someone else had given him. But that didn't completely absolve him. He had been the CEO. The final responsibility had belonged to him. He should have asked more questions. He should have challenged the numbers. He should have investigated. Instead, he had trusted the people around him. And someone might have used that trust to destroy hundreds of jobs. Alexander continued scrolling. Then he found the employee list. 417 names. He scanned the page. One name appeared halfway down. Daniel Carter, operations manager. Alexander stared at it. Then he opened Daniel's employee profile. Performance rating, excellent. Years of service, 32. Disciplinary actions, none. Termination reason, position eliminated. Alexander frowned. He opened the department restructuring chart. Daniel's position had been marked for elimination, but the position itself hadn't disappeared. A new title had replaced it 3 months later. Same department, similar responsibilities, different employee. Alexander's expression changed. He clicked the new employee's name, Richard Voss's nephew. Alexander pushed his chair backward. No. He returned to the restructuring documents. There it was. The position hadn't actually been redundant. Someone had wanted Daniel Carter gone. Alexander felt a cold sensation move through him. He kept searching. Then he found something worse. An internal email, written 6 days before the acquisition closed. Richard Voss had written to the HR director. The message was short. The final line read, "Carter needs to be removed before the transition. He knows too much about the old accounts." Alexander read it twice, then a third time. His hand moved away from the mouse. For 8 years he had believed Daniel Carter was one of hundreds of employees affected by an unavoidable restructuring. He wasn't. He had been specifically targeted. Alexander stared at the screen. And suddenly Naomi's words returned to him. "You had 8 years to understand." He looked at the date on the email. 6 days before Alexander had signed the acquisition documents. Someone had known. Someone had deliberately manipulated the process. And Alexander had unknowingly become the signature that made it possible. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 8 years, he wasn't thinking about profits. He wasn't thinking about the company's reputation. He wasn't thinking about how much money the acquisition had made. He was thinking about a 58-year-old man sitting at a kitchen table, telling his daughter that he had lost his job. And about the daughter who had just walked out of his office. Naomi had looked at him like a man she had every reason to distrust. Maybe she did. Alexander picked up his phone. "Claire, I'm here. I found something." Her voice sharpened. "What?" "Richard Voss." Silence. "What about him?" Alexander looked at the email again. "I think he manipulated the restructuring." Another pause. "Are you sure?" "No." He stared at the evidence. "But I'm going to find out." Alexander ended the call. Then he opened Naomi's application file. He stared at her name. Naomi Carter. He had spent 8 years believing the past was settled. Now he understood something uncomfortable. The past wasn't settled. It had simply been waiting for someone to ask the right question. And Naomi Carter had unknowingly become that question. But there was another problem Alexander hadn't considered. If he uncovered the truth, he might finally be able to prove Naomi's father had been wronged. Yet proving it wouldn't automatically repair the damage. It wouldn't give Daniel Carter back the years he had lost. It wouldn't erase Naomi's resentment. And it certainly wouldn't make Alexander innocent, because sometimes discovering the truth isn't the end of accountability. It's where accountability finally begins. Alexander didn't sleep that night. Not because he was afraid of what he might discover. He was afraid of what he already knew. At 2:14 in the morning, his office was the only room in the penthouse still illuminated. The city stretched beyond the glass walls, bright and restless. Alexander sat alone at his desk with the Hartwell files open on his computer. He had read the same email at least 20 times. Carter needs to be removed before the transition. He knows too much about the old accounts. There was no ambiguity. Daniel Carter hadn't been a casualty of restructuring. He had been targeted. Alexander leaned back and rubbed his eyes. He remembered the acquisition meeting. Richard Voss had sat across from him with a confident smile and a stack of reports. "Daniel is resistant to change," Richard had said. Alexander remembered asking, "Is he incompetent?" "No." The answer had come quickly. Then why eliminate his position? Richard had smiled. Sometimes good employees aren't the right employees for the future. At 31, Alexander had accepted the explanation. He no longer did. He opened another file, then another. The deeper he went, the worse it became. There were unexplained transfers, payments approved by executives, internal complaints that had disappeared from the final acquisition report, and one financial account that had been quietly moved days before the acquisition. Alexander stared at the numbers. Someone had been hiding money, and Daniel Carter had apparently known about it. Suddenly the phrase in Richard's email made sense. He knows too much about the old accounts. Alexander's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Claire Morgan, his chief legal officer. He answered. "You're awake." "So are you." "Unfortunately." Claire sighed. "I've reviewed the files." "And?" "You were right to be concerned." Alexander waited. Richard Voss wasn't simply protecting his position, he was protecting himself. "How much?" "We're still calculating." "Give me a range." "Potentially several million." Alexander's jaw tightened. "And Daniel?" "His termination was probably intentional." "Probably?" "Legally, we need more evidence." Alexander stood. "I don't care what we can prove yet. I want to know what happened." "We'll investigate." "No." Claire paused. "I'll investigate." "Alexander, I signed the acquisition. You were given fraudulent information." "I still signed it." Claire was silent. Alexander looked at the city. That makes it my responsibility. Responsibility isn't the same as guilt. Maybe not. He picked up the printed employee record, but it's still responsibility. Claire exhaled. You should sleep. I'll sleep when I know what happened. You've always been terrible at knowing when to stop. Alexander almost smiled. That's probably why we're successful. No. Claire's voice softened. That's probably why you're exhausted. The call ended. Alexander looked at the clock. 2:41 a.m. He finally closed the laptop. But sleep didn't come easily. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the next acquisition. He was thinking about a family he had never met. The next morning, Naomi woke before her alarm. She lay still for a moment, then remembered the interview. Her stomach tightened. She turned toward the empty side of the bed. There had been a time when she expected someone to be there. Now she preferred the emptiness. It was easier. No explanations. No disappointment. No waiting for another person to decide whether she was worth staying for. She got out of bed. Sophie was already awake. Mom? What? Are we still going to the library after school? Naomi smiled. If your homework is done. It is. All of it? Sophie hesitated. Most of it. Naomi laughed. Then we'll see. She walked into the kitchen. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms. A narrow kitchen. A living room where Sophie had somehow managed to create an entire world of stuffed animals, books, crayons and blankets. It wasn't luxurious. But it was theirs. Naomi poured coffee. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. An email from the company. Her heart sank. She opened it. Dear Ms. Carter. She stopped reading. She already knew. Rejected. She closed her eyes. Mom? I'm okay. Sophie looked at her. You didn't even read it. Naomi smiled. You're getting too observant. You always say you're okay when you're not. Naomi looked at her daughter. Children had a way of noticing what adults tried to hide. She crouched beside Sophie. Sometimes grown-ups say they're okay because they don't want other people to worry. Are you worried? Naomi thought about lying. Instead, she said, a little. Sophie nodded. Me too. About what? Our car. Naomi smiled. We'll fix it. Sophie hugged her. Naomi closed her eyes. She wanted to believe herself. She really did. Across town, Alexander sat in a meeting with 3 attorneys and 2 investigators. The room was cold. The conversation was colder. Richard Voss had left the company 7 years ago. He was now living in Florida. His records were incomplete. Several emails had been deleted, but there was enough to raise serious questions. One investigator slid a folder across the table. We found another document. Alexander opened it. It was a personnel evaluation. Daniel Carter's final review. The comments were overwhelmingly positive. Reliable, ethical, experienced, strong leadership. Then, in a handwritten note, potential concern, unwillingness to cooperate with executive requests regarding financial reporting. Alexander stared at it. What executive requests? The investigator shook his head. We're still trying to determine that. Alexander flipped the page. There was another name. Naomi Carter. Her employee review had also been altered. Original rating, excellent. Final rating, satisfactory. Reason, difficulty adapting to organizational change. Alexander frowned. She was 26. Yes. How did she become a problem? The investigator looked at him. She may have asked questions. Alexander slowly closed the file. What questions? We don't know yet. He stood. I want everything. We're working on it. No. Alexander looked around the room. I want every email, every personnel review, every payment, every communication between Richard Voss and Hartwell's leadership during the 6 months before and after the acquisition. One attorney raised an eyebrow. That's a significant undertaking. Do it. He left the room. But as he walked down the hallway, something bothered him. Not the investigation. Naomi. He remembered her face when she talked about her father. She hadn't sounded angry. Not entirely. She sounded tired, as though she'd carried the story for so long that anger had eventually become exhaustion. Alexander knew that feeling. He simply had never admitted it. That afternoon, Alexander received a message. Naomi Carter has declined the position. He stared at the screen. He wasn't surprised. Still, something about seeing the words bothered him. He could have called her. He didn't. He could have offered another position. He didn't. He could have sent money. He knew that would be insulting. Instead, he opened a new message. He typed, I understand your decision. I also understand that an apology without understanding what happened would mean very little. If you're willing, I'd like to hear your side of the story. No business, no job offer, just a conversation. He stared at the message, then deleted it. He typed again. I found information about the Hartwell acquisition that I believe you deserve to know about. He stopped. That sounded manipulative. He deleted it. Finally, he typed, I owe you honesty about something I recently discovered. If you're willing to talk, I'll explain. If not, I will respect that. He sent it. Then put the phone down. 5 minutes passed. 10, 20, nothing. He told himself he didn't care. At 4:17 p.m., his phone buzzed. Naomi, where? Alexander stared at the message. He replied, anywhere you're comfortable. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Naomi, public place, coffee shop, tomorrow. Alexander typed, okay. He almost added something else. He didn't. The next afternoon, Naomi sat across from Alexander in a quiet coffee shop. She had chosen the place deliberately. Open, public, neutral, no assistants, no lawyers, no expensive office, just 2 people sitting across from each other. Alexander arrived first. He stood when she approached. Hi. Hi. Naomi sat. Neither touched the coffee. Alexander placed a thin folder on the table. I found something. Naomi looked at it. What? Documents from the Hartwell acquisition. Her expression tightened. Why? Because I realized I didn't know the whole story. Naomi looked at him carefully. What did you find? Alexander opened the folder. Your father wasn't laid off because his position was actually redundant. Naomi didn't move. What? His position was deliberately eliminated. She stared at him. Alexander continued. The position was recreated 3 months later, under a different title. Naomi's breathing changed. Who took it? Richard Voss's nephew. Naomi looked away. No. I found an email suggesting Richard wanted your father removed because he knew about financial irregularities. Naomi stared at the table. For several seconds she said nothing. Then, you're lying. Alexander didn't flinch. I wish I were. She pushed the folder away. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know. You could have found this 8 years ago. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Naomi looked at him. Alexander didn't defend himself. I didn't investigate deeply enough. She swallowed. My father spent years believing he wasn't good enough. Alexander's face tightened. He wasn't the problem. He thought he was. I know. Naomi's eyes became wet. She looked away quickly. I hated watching him. Alexander said nothing. He used to wake up at 5 every morning. He was always working, always providing. Then suddenly he was home all day. She wiped beneath one eye. He started apologizing for things. Alexander's voice was quiet. Like what? For not having enough money. She looked at him. For not being the father he used to be. Alexander felt something inside him shift. I didn't know. I know. There it was again. Those words. I know. But this time, they didn't sound accusatory. They sounded exhausted. Naomi took a breath. After he died, I promised myself I'd never depend on a company again. Alexander understood. It explained her independence. The hesitation, the refusal to accept help, the way she reacted when he offered money. She wasn't simply stubborn. She had built a life around never giving anyone else enough power to destroy it. But Alexander also understood something else. He couldn't undo 8 years. He couldn't give Naomi back the years her father had lost. He couldn't erase her memories. And he couldn't ask her to forgive him for something he hadn't personally intended. All he could do was tell the truth. I am sorry, he said. Naomi looked at him. This time, she didn't reject the apology. She simply nodded. Thank you. They sat quietly. Then Naomi asked, what are you going to do? Alexander knew exactly what she meant. The truth. And if it damages your company, then it damages my company. And your reputation? He looked at her. Reputation is what people think you are. He paused. Character is what you do when nobody is watching. Naomi studied him. Who taught you that? My father. She smiled faintly. Mine too. For the first time, the distance between them seemed slightly smaller. Not gone. Not healed. Just smaller. Alexander didn't reach for her hand. Naomi didn't offer hers. Neither pretended the past had disappeared. But something had changed. For years, Naomi had believed Alexander represented the worst thing about powerful people. Now she wasn't sure. And Alexander had spent years believing that success meant never questioning his past. Now he knew better. When they left the coffee shop, they walked in opposite directions. No promises. No romantic declarations. No dramatic kiss. Just 2 people carrying new information. And sometimes, That was how healing began. Not with forgiveness, not with love, not even with hope. Sometimes it began with the simple courage to finally look at the truth. But Alexander didn't yet know that discovering what happened to Daniel Carter was only half the story. Because the deeper he investigated, the more he would uncover about Naomi herself. And eventually he would have to confront the question neither of them was ready to answer. If the past had brought them together, could they build a future without allowing the past to control it? For the next 2 weeks, Naomi avoided Alexander Reed. Not dramatically. She didn't block his number. She didn't return his messages with anger. She simply became very good at being unavailable. When he sent a brief message asking whether she had received the documents, she replied, "Yes, thank you." When he asked whether she wanted to discuss them further, she said, "Not right now." And when he offered to connect her with someone who might help her find a new job, she didn't respond at all. It wasn't because she hated him. That would have been easier. Hate was simple. What Naomi felt was more complicated. She was beginning to see Alexander as a person instead of a symbol. And that was dangerous. For years, she had kept certain people in neat categories. People with power went here. People with money went there. People who made promises went somewhere else. It made life easier. If you decided what someone was before they had the chance to disappoint you, you didn't have to be surprised when they did. Alexander didn't fit neatly into any of those categories anymore. That irritated her. She preferred certainty. Especially when it came to men. Especially men with money. Especially men who could walk into a room and make other people rearrange their schedules. Naomi had spent too many years watching powerful people call their decisions necessary, while ordinary families paid the price. She wasn't going to let herself become emotionally dependent on one, so she focused on what she could control: her daughter, her work, her bills, her apartment, her routine, and, most importantly, herself. At least that was the plan. Then, her car broke down again. On a Tuesday morning, in the parking lot of her temporary workplace, Naomi stood beside the Honda with one hand on her hip and stared at the engine. "You've got to be kidding me." The engine offered no apology. She checked the time. 7:18 a.m. Her shift started at 8. Sophie had to be at school by 7:45, and the mechanic had told her that the alternator replacement would be ready in another day. She had borrowed the car from her sister. Her sister was out of town. Naomi looked at her phone. No messages, no miracle. She called a rideshare service. Estimated arrival, 12 minutes. Estimated cost, $31. Naomi stared at the number. $31. It wasn't an enormous amount. But when you're counting every dollar, small expenses become loud. She accepted the ride, then called Sophie. "Hey, sweetheart." "Mom?" "Yes?" "Where are you?" "At work." "You said you'd take me to school." "I know." Naomi closed her eyes. "I'm going to send someone to pick you up." "Who?" "Mrs. Harris." "The one who has the loud dog?" "Yes." Sophie sighed. "Okay. I'll see you after school." "Okay. Love you." "Love you too." Naomi ended the call. Then she looked at her car again. "One day," she muttered, "I'm going to own a vehicle that doesn't hate me." "That's ambitious." Naomi froze. She knew that voice. She turned. Alexander stood several feet away. Dark trousers, white shirt, no tie, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. He looked completely out of place in the cracked parking lot. Naomi stared at him. "What are you doing here?" "Meeting someone." "Here?" He pointed toward the building. "One of our portfolio companies leases the second floor." Naomi looked at the building, then at him. "Of course." Alexander smiled slightly. "Of course what?" "Nothing." He glanced at her car. "Again?" "Don't. I didn't say anything." "You were thinking it." "I was thinking you have terrible luck with cars." Naomi crossed her arms. "Thank you." "You're welcome." She shook her head. Her rideshare app updated. Driver arriving in 6 minutes. Alexander noticed. "Do you have somewhere to be?" "Yes." "Can I help?" "No." The answer came automatically. Alexander nodded. "Okay." He took a sip of coffee. Naomi stared at him. He wasn't leaving. "You can go." "I can, but you're not." "Not yet." "Why?" He shrugged. "Because you look like you're about to start arguing with your car." "I wasn't." "You were." She looked away. A tiny smile appeared despite herself. Alexander noticed. He didn't comment. That was becoming one of the things Naomi appreciated about him. He noticed things without always turning them into conversations. Her phone buzzed. The rideshare driver cancelled. Naomi stared at the screen. "Seriously?" Alexander looked at her. "Problem?" My driver cancelled. I can have someone take you. No. Naomi, no. He paused. All right. She expected frustration. There wasn't any. Instead, Alexander looked at his watch. How far is the school? 20 minutes. I can take you. No. Then what are you going to do? I'll call another car. He nodded. Okay. He took another sip of coffee. Naomi looked at him. Why don't you argue? Would it help? No. Then there's no point. She stared at him. You're strange. I've been told. Her phone buzzed again. Another rideshare cancellation. Naomi sighed. Alexander held up his hands. I won't offer again. Thank you. A minute passed. Then Naomi looked at him. How much? He frowned. For what? The ride. I wasn't going to charge you. Then I'm not going. Alexander smiled. You are remarkably determined. I have to be. Something changed in his expression. He nodded. I understand. That answer stopped her. Because he didn't say, you don't have to be. He didn't tell her she could relax. He didn't tell her he would take care of everything. He simply said, I understand. Naomi looked down. Fine. Alexander's driver was waiting outside. They got into the vehicle. Sophie was dropped at school first. Then, Naomi was taken to work. Alexander remained in the front. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer advice. He didn't mention money. When they reached Naomi's workplace, she opened the door. Thank you. Alexander nodded. You're welcome. She stepped out. Then he said, Naomi. She turned. Your mechanic. What about him? I know someone who owns a repair shop. Her expression immediately changed. I'm not asking you to pay. I didn't say I would. She looked at him carefully. What are you offering? A contact. Why? Because he's good. Naomi hesitated. And nothing. She studied his face. No hidden favor? No. No job interview? No. No expectation that I owe you dinner? Alexander smiled. Definitely not. She almost laughed. Okay. He handed her a business card. Call him if you want. She took it. Thank you. Then she walked inside. Alexander watched her disappear through the glass doors. He had no idea why helping Naomi felt different from helping everyone else. Normally, he solved problems quickly. Someone needed money. He transferred it. Someone needed a connection. He made the call. Someone needed a company saved. He bought it. His entire life had been built around solving things. But Naomi didn't want solutions. She wanted choices. That distinction was beginning to matter to him. That evening, Naomi sat at her kitchen table. Sophie's homework was spread between them. Mom? Yes? Who's Alexander? Naomi looked up. Why? You smiled when you talked about him. Naomi nearly choked on her coffee. I did not. You did. I smile all the time. No, you don't. Naomi stared at her daughter. That's rude. Sophie giggled. Naomi shook her head. He's just someone I know. Is he your boyfriend? No. Do you like him? Naomi paused. I don't know. Sophie nodded seriously. That's usually what people say when they do. Naomi laughed. You have too many opinions. You taught me to have opinions. Unfortunately. Sophie returned to her homework. Naomi looked down at the business card Alexander had given her. She had called the repair shop. The owner had offered her a discounted rate. No strings. No payment from Alexander. No favor. Just a contact. She wasn't sure why that mattered. Maybe because she was slowly discovering that there was a difference between being rescued and being supported. Being rescued meant someone took control. Being supported meant someone gave you room to remain in control. That distinction was important, especially to someone like Naomi, because dependence had never frightened her as much as the loss of choice. She had watched her father lose his job, then his confidence, then his sense of identity. She had promised herself she would never let another person determine her worth. Alexander didn't know that promise. Not yet. Across town, Alexander was having dinner with his younger sister Claire. You've been distracted. Alexander looked up. I'm working. You always say that when you're distracted. He put down his fork. What do you want? Claire smiled. Nothing. Then why are you interrogating me? I'm your sister. That's not an answer. It's the best answer. Alexander shook his head. Claire leaned back. Is there someone? No. That was quick. Because it's true. Then why did you answer before I finished the question? Alexander stared at her. Claire laughed. You're terrible at this. At what? Pretending you don't care. He looked away. Claire softened. Alexander. What? Whatever you're doing, don't turn it into another project. He frowned. What does that mean? You have a habit. What habit? You meet someone who has a problem, and suddenly you need to solve their entire life. Alexander was quiet. Claire continued. You can't fix people. I'm not trying to fix anyone. Good. She took a sip of water. Then don't. Alexander stared at his plate. Naomi's face appeared in his mind. Her refusal. Her caution. Her independence. Her insistence that she didn't need saving. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe he had spent his entire life confusing usefulness with intimacy. If he could solve a problem, he felt valuable. If he couldn't, he felt powerless. That realization unsettled him, because Naomi was the first person he had met who seemed determined not to let him earn closeness through usefulness. And strangely, he respected her for it. 3 days later, Naomi's mechanic called. Your car is ready. She almost cried with relief. She picked Sophie up from school and drove straight to the shop. The owner greeted her. Alexander said you'd come. Naomi stopped. Alexander? Yeah. She frowned. I thought he wasn't involved. He didn't pay anything. The owner smiled. He just asked me to make sure I treated you fairly. Naomi looked away. That sounded like Alexander. Helpful without taking control. At least, she hoped. When she got home, she found a message from him. Glad you got your car back. She stared at it, then typed, thank you. She almost put the phone down. Instead, she added, you didn't have to do that. His response came a minute later. I know, Naomi smiled. She typed, good night, Alexander. He replied, good night, Naomi. No heart emoji, no flirtation, no pressure, just good night. And somehow, that simple exchange stayed in Naomi's mind longer than it should have. Because trust wasn't arriving like a storm. It was arriving like rain, a little at a time, quietly, almost unnoticed. And neither Naomi nor Alexander realized that the more comfortable they became around each other, the harder it would become to keep the past from interfering with what was slowly beginning between them. Because attraction was easy, trust was harder, and Naomi had no intention of giving Alexander hers quickly. Naomi had become very good at keeping people at a comfortable distance, not so far away that they felt rejected, not close enough that they could hurt her. It was an arrangement she had perfected over the years. At work, she was friendly. With neighbors, polite. With Sophie, completely open. With everyone else, careful. Alexander was becoming a problem because he seemed determined to respect the distance without disappearing from her life. He didn't text constantly. He didn't demand her attention. He didn't send flowers to her apartment. He didn't appear outside her workplace with expensive gifts. He simply existed. And somehow, that was more disarming than any grand romantic gesture could have been. 2 weeks after the coffee shop conversation, Naomi found herself sitting across from him again. This time, the meeting wasn't about her father's past. It was about a community development project. Naomi had recently begun volunteering at a neighborhood center that provided after-school programs for children. Alexander's foundation was considering funding the center. When Naomi discovered his name on the proposal, she almost withdrew. But the center needed the funding, so she stayed. Alexander entered the meeting room carrying a folder. He looked at Naomi. You're on the advisory committee? Unfortunately. His mouth curved. That's unfortunate for me. She tried not to smile. Don't flatter yourself. I wasn't. You were. I wasn't. You absolutely were. Alexander sat. The meeting began. For an hour, Naomi watched him interact with the community leaders. He asked questions. He listened. He didn't dominate the room. When someone disagreed with him, he didn't become defensive. That surprised her. Money had made him powerful, but he didn't seem to need everyone around him to acknowledge it. After the meeting, Naomi gathered her papers. Alexander approached. You were good in there. At what? Questioning the budget. I didn't like the numbers. Neither did I. She looked at him. Then why were you going to approve it? I wasn't. Oh. He smiled. You're getting better at giving me the benefit of the doubt. Don't get used to it. I won't. She picked up her bag. Are you always this annoying? Only around you. Naomi paused. There was something in his voice. Not flirtation exactly. Something quieter. She looked at him. He looked back. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Naomi broke eye contact. I have to pick up Sophie. I know. How do you know? You mentioned it earlier. Oh. She walked toward the door. Alexander followed. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright. Naomi stopped near the sidewalk. Thank you. For what? For helping with the car. He nodded. You already thanked me. I know. Then why say it again? Because I wanted to. Alexander smiled. You're welcome. Naomi turned to leave, then stopped. Alexander? Yes? Why do you help people? He thought about it. Because I can. He frowned. That's it? No. He looked toward the street. Because, when I was younger, someone helped my family. Naomi waited. He didn't continue. She didn't press. Instead, she nodded. Okay. She walked away. Alexander watched her go. He wanted to tell her more, but he understood something. Trust wasn't built by telling someone everything at once. It was built by giving them the freedom to decide when they were ready to hear it. That evening, Naomi arrived at the community center with Sophie. Sophie ran toward the children. Naomi smiled. She loved watching her daughter become comfortable in places where adults weren't constantly telling her to be quiet. The center director approached Naomi. Alexander called. Naomi frowned. Why? He wants to increase the funding. How much? The director told her. Naomi's eyes widened. That's a lot. It is. Why? He said the original budget didn't account for transportation and meals. Naomi looked across the room. Alexander wasn't there. She frowned. Did he say anything else? No. That was exactly what made it complicated. Alexander wasn't doing this to impress her. He wasn't even there. He had simply noticed a problem and corrected it. Naomi wasn't sure whether she admired that quality or distrusted it. Probably both. Later that night, Naomi received a call. It was her younger brother, Marcus. Hey. You busy? Not really. Mom called me. Naomi's stomach tightened. What happened? Nothing serious. Marcus, he sighed. Dad's old house. Naomi went quiet. What about it? There's still paperwork from the bank. I thought that was settled. So did I. Naomi sat down. How much? Marcus told her. Naomi closed her eyes. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was another expense, another reminder, another loose thread from a past she had spent years trying to tie off. I'll handle it. Naomi, you don't have to. I said I'll handle it. You're always handling everything. She didn't respond. Marcus sighed. That's what I'm talking about. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. Naomi looked at the floor. Good night, Marcus. She ended the call. Then she sat alone in the quiet apartment. Sophie was asleep. The television was off. The refrigerator hummed. Naomi stared at her hands. She hated moments like this. Not because she couldn't solve them. Because she could. She always did. But every problem reminded her that there was nobody else. Nobody who would simply say, I've got this one. Her phone buzzed. Alexander. She stared at his name. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. Then answered, Hello? Hi. His voice was calm. Everything okay? Naomi almost laughed. Why did everyone keep asking her that? Yes. There was a pause. You don't sound okay. She closed her eyes. I've had a long day. Do you want to talk about it? No. Okay. She waited. He didn't push. That somehow made her want to talk. There's some paperwork involving my father's estate. Alexander's voice softened. Do you need a lawyer? No. I know a good one. No. Okay. She almost smiled. You're learning. I listen occasionally. Naomi leaned back. I don't need you to fix it. I know. I just... She stopped. Alexander waited. I don't know. You don't have to. The simplicity of the answer caught her off guard. Naomi looked toward the dark hallway. Sometimes I get tired. I know. No, you don't. You're right. She swallowed. Sorry. Don't apologize. I don't usually talk like this. Then you don't have to. She smiled faintly. You're making this very difficult. What? Keeping you at a distance. Alexander was quiet. Naomi realized what she had said. I didn't mean... I know. She laughed softly. Good night. Good night, Naomi. She ended the call, then sat there for several minutes. Her heart wasn't racing. She wasn't dreaming about him. She wasn't imagining a future. She simply felt less alone. And for Naomi, that was more significant than romance. Alexander placed his phone on the desk. Claire was sitting across from him. She had heard enough to understand. Don't. Alexander looked at her. I didn't say anything. You were going to. Claire smiled. You're falling for her. Alexander looked away. Maybe. Does she know? No. Do you? He didn't answer. Claire leaned forward. Alexander, listen to me. He looked at her. Don't rush her because you're ready. I won't. She may take longer. I know. And you can't make her heal faster. I know. Claire smiled. Good. Alexander looked down. What if she never trusts me? Then you accept that? He nodded. What if she does? Claire smiled. Then don't ruin it by trying to control the outcome. Alexander laughed quietly. You make everything sound simple. It isn't simple. She stood. That's why you have to let it happen slowly. After Claire left, Alexander sat alone. He opened his laptop. The Hartwell investigation was still ongoing. New evidence had emerged. The more they uncovered, the more complicated the story became. Richard Voss had not acted alone. There were other executives involved. Some were still in the industry. One was still working with a company Alexander's firm had recently partnered with. The investigation could become explosive. But Alexander wasn't thinking about business. He was thinking about Naomi. He wondered what would happen when she learned everything. Would she hate him? Would she believe he was different? Would she decide that none of it mattered because the damage was already done? He didn't know. For once, Alexander didn't try to calculate the outcome. He simply closed the laptop. The following Saturday, Naomi took Sophie to a small farmer's market. It was one of their favorite places. Fresh bread, fruit, local crafts, music. Sophie loved the honey sticks. Naomi loved pretending she wasn't going to buy them. They were walking past a flower stand when Sophie suddenly stopped. Mom! What? She pointed. Alexander was standing near a coffee vendor. Naomi froze. He saw them at the same time. Sophie waved. Alexander! Naomi closed her eyes. Of course. Alexander smiled and walked over. Hi, Sophie. Hi. What are you doing here? Buying honey. Alexander looked at Naomi. Of course. Naomi smiled. Don't. I didn't say anything. You were thinking it. Fair. Sophie looked between them. Are you friends? Naomi hesitated. Alexander answered first. I think we're becoming friends. Naomi looked at him. She couldn't disagree. Not entirely. Alexander looked at Sophie. Did you find the honey? Yes. Good. Sophie nodded. Then she pointed at the flower stand. Mum likes those. Naomi's eyes widened. Sophie, what? Alexander glanced at the flowers. What kind? Sophie pointed. The white ones. Alexander looked at Naomi. Naomi shook her head. Don't, he smiled. I wasn't going to. Good. He turned back to Sophie. But they're nice. Sophie nodded. They are. They stood there together. No dramatic moment, no declarations, just an ordinary Saturday morning. But something about it felt different. Naomi wasn't looking for the exit. She wasn't calculating how long she had been standing beside him. She wasn't wondering what he wanted. She was simply there. And Alexander wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't solving anything. He wasn't buying anything. He was just standing beside her. For two people who had spent years protecting themselves through control, that ordinary moment was quietly significant. Because love didn't always begin with fireworks. Sometimes it began when you realized you no longer felt the need to keep your guard up every second. That afternoon, Naomi received another message from Alexander. Had a good time seeing you and Sophie today. She stared at the screen. Then replied, we did too. She hesitated. Then added, thank you for not buying the flowers. His reply came quickly. I was tempted. She smiled. I'm glad you resisted. Me too. Naomi put the phone down. For the first time in years, she wasn't asking herself whether a man could save her. She was asking something much smaller, something much healthier. Could she simply enjoy getting to know him? She didn't have the answer yet. But she was willing to find out, and Alexander was learning the same lesson from the other side. He couldn't earn Naomi's trust with money. He couldn't force it with persistence. He couldn't purchase it with kindness. He could only become someone whose actions made trust reasonable. That would take time, and neither of them knew yet that time would become their greatest challenge. Because Alexander was ready to move forward, Naomi was still learning how to stop looking backward. And eventually, those two timelines would collide. 3 weeks passed before Naomi realized she had stopped checking the time whenever Alexander was around. It happened gradually. There was no particular day she could point to. No dramatic confession. No moment when music should have played in the background. Just small changes. She started answering his calls without staring at the screen first. She stopped wondering whether every invitation came with an expectation. She allowed Sophie to talk about him without immediately changing the subject. And most dangerously of all, she began looking forward to seeing him. That frightened her. Not because Alexander had done anything wrong, because he hadn't. If he had been arrogant, controlling, impatient, or dishonest, Naomi could have walked away without questioning herself. Instead, Alexander had been patient, almost frustratingly patient. He respected her boundaries. He listened when she spoke. When she said no, he accepted it. When she needed space, he gave it. And when she needed help, he waited for her to ask. It was difficult to distrust someone who kept giving you reasons to trust them. On a Friday evening, Naomi stood in front of her bedroom mirror, staring at 2 dresses. Sophie sat on the bed. The blue one? Naomi looked at her. You didn't even look at the other one. I know. Why? Because you always choose the blue one. Naomi smiled. You've been studying me. You're my mom. Fair? Naomi put on the blue dress. Tonight wasn't a date. At least, that was what she had told herself. Alexander had invited her to a small charity dinner hosted by his foundation. There would be investors, community leaders, business partners, nothing romantic. That was the official explanation. Naomi didn't believe herself. She checked her phone. A message from Alexander, no pressure. If you decide you don't want to come, I'll understand. She smiled. That was the reason she was going. Because he wasn't demanding that she show up. She walked into the living room. Sophie looked up. You look pretty. Thank you. Are you going on a date? No. Sophie raised an eyebrow. Naomi sighed. Maybe? Sophie grinned. He's your boyfriend. He is not. Not yet. Naomi laughed. Go brush your teeth. Alexander was waiting outside the restaurant when Naomi arrived. He was wearing a dark suit. She stopped beside the car. You look... He waited. Different. He smiled. That's diplomatic. I was trying to be polite. Should I be worried? Probably. He laughed. Naomi smiled. The evening went better than she expected. Alexander introduced her to people without making her feel like an accessory. When someone asked how they knew each other, he didn't exaggerate. We're friends. Naomi noticed the word. Friends. It was safe, comfortable, and somehow, she liked hearing it. Later, they stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. Naomi rested her hands on the railing. It's beautiful. Alexander stood beside her. Yeah. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, I'm glad you came. Me too. He looked at her. Can I ask you something? Depends. Do you trust me? Naomi thought about it. A little. He smiled. That's more than I expected. Don't get excited. I'm trying not to. She laughed. Then his expression became serious. I don't want to rush you. Naomi looked at him. I know. But I also don't want to pretend I don't have feelings for you. Her smile disappeared. Not because she didn't feel something. Because she did. Alexander continued. I'm not asking you for an answer tonight. Good. He nodded. I just thought you deserved honesty. Naomi looked away. The city lights blurred slightly. I don't know what I want. That's okay. No. She turned toward him. It's not. Why? Because you seem to know. Alexander was quiet. I know I like you. Naomi swallowed. And I don't know if I'm ready. I understand. She looked at him. You keep saying that. Because I do. But what if I take too long? I'll wait. The answer came too quickly. Naomi's expression tightened. Don't, Alexander frowned. Don't what? Promise me you'll wait. Why? Because I don't want to become responsible for your patience. That stopped him. Naomi looked down. I don't want you waiting around while I figure myself out. Alexander nodded slowly. Okay. You're not angry? No. Disappointed? Yes. She looked at him. He smiled faintly. But disappointment isn't your responsibility. Naomi didn't know what to say. That was one of the healthiest things anyone had ever told her. The following weeks were harder, because now that the truth was spoken, they couldn't pretend there wasn't something between them. Alexander became slightly more distant. Not cold, just careful. Naomi noticed. She didn't know whether to be relieved or hurt. One evening, she called him. He answered immediately. Hi. Hi. Everything okay? Yes. There was silence. Then Naomi asked, Are you avoiding me? No. You are. I'm trying to give you space. I didn't ask for space. Alexander paused. You told me you weren't ready. I know. Then what do you want? Naomi didn't know. That was the problem. I don't know. He sighed. Naomi, what? I can't keep pretending I don't want more. Her heart tightened. I didn't ask you to. I know. Then what are you saying? I'm saying I need to protect myself too. That hurt. Naomi looked toward the window. She suddenly felt as though she were being punished for being honest. I thought you said you understood. I do. Then why does it feel like you're pulling away? Because understanding your boundaries doesn't mean I don't have feelings. Silence. Naomi swallowed. So what happens now? I don't know. She hated that answer, because it sounded too much like uncertainty, too much like the relationships she'd known before. People didn't stay. People got tired. People moved on. She suddenly wished she hadn't called. "Good night, Alexander." "Naomi." She ended the call, then sat on the edge of her bed. She was angry. At him, at herself, at the situation, mostly at herself, because some small part of her had started believing that maybe this time could be different. And now she was watching that hope become dangerous. The next morning, Alexander sat in his office staring at an email from Naomi. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called last night." He typed, "You don't have to apologize." Deleted it. Typed, "I understand." Deleted that too. Finally. "You don't need to apologize for being honest." He sent it, then put his phone away. His assistant entered. "Mr. Reed, the board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Alexander nodded. "I'm coming." He stood, but before leaving, he looked at the photograph on his desk. His father, the man who had taught him that success meant never depending on anyone. Alexander had spent his entire adult life following that lesson. Until Naomi. She had shown him something his father never had. That independence could become isolation if you took it too far. But Alexander also had to learn something else. Loving Naomi didn't mean waiting indefinitely. And Naomi had to learn that asking someone for time didn't mean expecting them to remain emotionally frozen while she decided what she wanted. Neither was wrong. They were simply moving at different speeds. And sometimes, even good people hurt each other when their needs arrive at different times. That evening, Naomi was preparing dinner when someone knocked on her door. She opened it. Alexander stood outside. She stared at him. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk." "You could have called." "I could have." She stepped aside. He entered. Sophie was at her friend's house. The apartment was quiet. Alexander remained near the doorway. "I don't want to argue." "Neither do I." He looked at her. "I think we misunderstood each other." Naomi crossed her arms. "How? You thought my need for space meant I was withdrawing from you. Wasn't it?" "No." "Then what was it?" "Me trying to respect what you told me." Naomi looked away. "I don't want to lose you." Alexander's voice softened. "But I don't want you to feel like you owe me a relationship because I've been patient." Naomi looked at him. "I don't. I know." He stepped closer. "But I need you to understand something." She waited. "I can be patient without pretending I don't have needs." Naomi nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" "Yes." She hesitated. "I'm just scared." Alexander didn't move. "Of me?" "No." "Then what?" "Of what happens if I actually let you matter." The honesty in her voice surprised both of them. Alexander looked at her. "You don't have to decide tonight." Naomi smiled sadly. "That's the problem." "What?" "I keep waiting for the perfect time to feel ready." And maybe there isn't one." Alexander nodded. "Probably not." She looked at him. "What if I'm never completely healed?" "Neither am I." That answer stayed between them. Neither person was pretending to be finished. Neither claimed to have everything figured out. For the first time, Naomi realized something important. Maybe she had been waiting to become fearless before allowing herself to love. But courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was making a choice, while fear was still present. She took a breath. "I want to try." Alexander didn't move. "Are you sure?" "No." He smiled. "That's honest. But I want to try." He nodded. "Then we'll try." No kiss. No dramatic embrace. Just two people standing in a small apartment, agreeing to take one step forward without pretending they knew where the road ended. And that was enough. For now. But the fragile peace wouldn't last. Because while Naomi was learning to trust Alexander emotionally, Alexander was uncovering more information about her past. And what he discovered next would force him to make a decision that could destroy the trust they had only just begun building. He would have to choose between protecting Naomi from painful truth, or finally telling her everything. And this time, there would be no easy answer. For the first time in years, Naomi allowed herself to be hopeful. Not completely, not recklessly, just enough to notice the difference. She and Alexander began seeing each other more regularly. Sometimes it was dinner, sometimes coffee, sometimes nothing more than a 20-minute walk after work. There were no expensive gifts, no declarations about forever, no conversations about marriage. They were simply learning each other. Alexander learned that Naomi hated crowded restaurants. She learned that he couldn't cook anything that required more than 3 ingredients. He learned that Sophie liked pancakes for dinner. She learned that Alexander read financial reports before bed when he couldn't sleep. He learned that Naomi became quiet when she was overwhelmed. She learned that he became excessively productive when he was afraid. Their differences were becoming visible. So were their similarities. Both were stubborn. Both disliked asking for help. Both had difficulty admitting when something hurt. And both had spent years believing that being needed was safer than being vulnerable. For a while, that was enough. Then, Alexander received a phone call that changed everything. It came on a Monday morning. His investigator was on the line. "We found something." Alexander stopped walking. "What?" "Another internal communication from the Hartwell transition." "Send it." "I think you should hear this first." Alexander waited. The investigator lowered his voice. Naomi wasn't just an employee who happened to be affected by the restructuring. Alexander's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Her father wasn't the only Carter involved." "What are you saying?" Naomi had access to some of the financial records. Alexander stared through the windows of his office. "What records?" "Internal expense accounts, vendor payments, executive transfers." "Was she involved?" "No." The investigator paused. "She reported irregularities." Alexander closed his eyes. "To whom?" "Richard Voss." Alexander's jaw tightened. What happened? Her complaint was dismissed. Why wasn't that in the acquisition report? Because it was removed. Alexander looked at his phone. Naomi. Suddenly, several things made sense. Her distrust, her refusal to work for powerful people, her father's situation, her insistence that she never wanted to depend on anyone. But there was something else. Was Naomi threatened? "We found evidence that someone pressured her to withdraw the complaint." Alexander's expression hardened. "Who?" "We're still confirming." "Find out." "Alexander. Find out." He ended the call. Then he sat down. He stared at the empty chair across from his desk. He could tell Naomi. She deserved to know. But what if she wasn't ready? What if learning that her father hadn't simply been laid off, but that she herself had been targeted, destroyed whatever fragile peace she had built? Alexander had spent his life solving problems. He could protect her. He could make sure nobody involved ever came near her again. He could use his influence to expose everyone responsible. But another voice inside him asked a harder question. Who gave you permission to decide what she could handle? He didn't like the question, because he knew the answer. Nobody. That evening, Naomi noticed something different about him. They were sitting at a quiet restaurant. Alexander barely touched his food. "You've been somewhere else all night." He looked at her. "I'm fine." She raised an eyebrow. "Don't use my line on me." He almost smiled. "Sorry. What happened?" "Work. Bad? Complicated." Naomi studied him. "You can tell me." "I know. But you're not." Alexander looked down. "Not yet." The answer bothered her. She didn't know why. Maybe because trust was supposed to work both ways. She had opened the door. He was still standing outside one of his. "Is this about my family?" Alexander looked at her. "No." It wasn't entirely true. That made him uncomfortable. Naomi noticed the hesitation. "You don't have to tell me." "Naomi, no." She put down her fork. "If you're not ready, that's okay." He nodded, but the silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It felt like a wall. 2 days later, Naomi received an unexpected email. It was from a legal firm. They were representing a former Hartwell executive. The email requested a meeting. Naomi's heart began racing. She called Alexander. He didn't answer. She called again. Still nothing. She sent a message. "I received something strange. Can you call me?" He didn't respond. Naomi stared at her phone. A familiar feeling settled in her chest. Being left out. Being kept in the dark. Being the last person to know what was happening to her own life. She hated that feeling. When Alexander finally called 2 hours later, she answered immediately. "Why didn't you tell me?" He went quiet. "You know what I'm talking about." "Naomi, did you know they were going to contact me?" "Yes." Her stomach dropped. "You knew?" "I found out yesterday." "And you didn't tell me?" "I wanted to understand the situation first." "Why?" "Because I didn't want you to worry." Naomi laughed bitterly. "That's your reason?" "I was trying to protect you." "No." She stood. "You were trying to control the information." "That's not what I meant." "But that's what you did." Alexander exhaled. "I didn't know whether the information was reliable." "You could have told me that." "I know. You could have let me decide what to do." "I know. Then why didn't you?" He had no answer that wouldn't sound like an excuse. Naomi's voice softened, which somehow made it worse. "You keep telling me you respect my choices." "I do. Then respect this one." "What choice?" "Whether I can handle the truth." Silence. Alexander closed his eyes. She was right. He had done exactly what he promised himself he wouldn't do. He had taken a problem, decided he could manage it better, and quietly taken control. It was the same instinct that had guided him through his business career. Identify the problem, limit uncertainty, control the variables, move forward. But Naomi wasn't a business problem. She was a person. And she had spent years fighting to retain control over her own life. I made a mistake, he said. Naomi didn't respond. I was wrong. Still nothing. I should have told you. She sat down. Yes. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know. But I did. Yes. Alexander swallowed. What do you need from me? Naomi was quiet for a long time. Space. His chest tightened. Okay. And I need you to understand that space isn't punishment. I understand. Do you? Yes. She ended the call. Alexander remained still. For the first time, he understood how easily good intentions could become harmful. He hadn't lied to Naomi because he wanted power over her. He had withheld information because he believed he could protect her from unnecessary pain. But intention didn't change impact. That lesson was becoming painfully familiar. The next morning, Alexander met with his legal team. Release everything. Claire looked at him. Everything? Everything relevant to Naomi's family. Even if it implicates people connected to the company. Especially then. She studied him. You understand? This could become public. Yes, it could cost the company millions. I know. And you could face questions about why this wasn't discovered earlier. Alexander nodded. I should. Claire leaned back. You're different. Alexander looked at her. No. He shook his head. I'm just finally looking at the things I should have looked at years ago. Naomi spent the next few days alone with her thoughts. She didn't want to talk to Alexander, but she missed him. That irritated her. She had spent years telling herself she didn't need anyone. Now she was discovering that needing someone's presence didn't automatically mean surrendering your independence. That was a difficult lesson. One evening, Sophie found her sitting at the kitchen table. Mom? Yeah? Are you sad? Naomi smiled. A little. Because of Alexander? Naomi looked at her. How do you know everything? Sophie shrugged. I pay attention. Naomi laughed softly. Then Sophie asked, did he do something bad? Naomi thought carefully. He made a mistake. Did he say sorry? Yes. Then why are you still sad? Naomi looked at her daughter. Because sometimes saying sorry doesn't make the feeling disappear immediately. Sophie considered that. Then how does it disappear? Naomi smiled. I don't know. Sophie nodded. Maybe you just have to wait. The simplicity of the answer touched Naomi. Maybe that was exactly what she needed. Not another solution. Not another promise. Time. 3 days later, Naomi received a package. Inside was a copy of the complete Hartwell investigation. No note from Alexander. No flowers. No request that she call him. Just the documents. Naomi opened the first page. Then the second. Then the third. Her hands began shaking. She found her father's name. Then her own. She read about the complaint she had filed 8 years earlier. A complaint she had almost forgotten. She had reported unusual vendor payments. She had suspected that money was being moved through companies connected to senior executives. Her complaint had been dismissed. The report said she had misunderstood internal accounting procedures. She remembered that day. She had been 26. She had walked into Richard Voss's office with documents in her hand. He had smiled. Naomi, you're young. You don't understand how these things work. She had believed him. Or perhaps she had simply been afraid. Then she read the next page. Employee concern subsequently escalated internally. Her name appeared again. And then, termination recommended. Naomi stopped breathing for a moment. She had thought her father's termination was unrelated to hers. It wasn't. They had both been targeted. Her father because he knew too much. Her because she had asked too many questions. And Alexander's signature had approved the acquisition that gave those people the power to do it. Naomi closed the file. She cried then, not loudly, not dramatically, just tears sliding down her face while she sat alone at the kitchen table. She wasn't crying because Alexander had lied. She was crying because the past suddenly made sense. And sometimes understanding why something happened doesn't make it hurt less. It makes the pain sharper. Because now she could see how many moments might have gone differently. What if someone had listened? What if her father had been believed? What if she had challenged Richard? What if Alexander had investigated? What if... She stopped herself. There was no value in living inside a list of alternate realities. The past couldn't be rewritten, but the future could still be chosen. Her phone sat beside the documents. Alexander's name was there. Naomi stared at it. Then she typed, "I received the files." She paused, added, "Thank you for giving me the truth." She nearly sent it. Then added one more sentence. "I need some time to understand what it means." She pressed send. Alexander replied almost immediately. "Take all the time you need. Nothing else. No pressure. No defense. No request for forgiveness." Naomi put the phone down. And, for the first time since their argument, she felt something other than anger. Respect. Not complete trust. Not forgiveness. Just respect. Because Alexander had finally learned the difference between protecting someone and controlling what they were allowed to know. A week passed. Naomi returned to the community center. She went back to work. She helped Sophie with homework. She paid her bills. She lived. The past remained painful, but it no longer controlled every moment. One afternoon, Alexander appeared at the community center. Naomi saw him through the window. He didn't approach. He simply stood near the entrance. She walked outside. "Why are you here?" "To check on the funding." "You could have called." "I could have." She almost smiled. "You've learned." "I'm trying." They stood several feet apart. Alexander looked tired. Naomi noticed. "You look terrible." He smiled. "Thank you. I mean it." "I've been busy." "With the investigation?" "Yes." She nodded. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough." She looked away. "I read everything." "I know. I still don't know what I feel." "You don't have to." She looked at him. "Are you going to keep saying that?" "If it's true." Naomi smiled faintly. Then she took a breath. "I don't want to punish you for what happened 8 years ago." Alexander said nothing. "But I also can't pretend it doesn't matter." "I don't expect you to." She looked at him. "And I don't want you trying to make it disappear." "I won't." "Good." A long silence followed. Then Naomi said, "I think I'm ready to have dinner." Alexander looked surprised. "Dinner?" "Yes." "With me?" She rolled her eyes. "Don't make it weird." A smile spread across his face. "I'll try." Naomi smiled too. "But nothing expensive." "Understood." "And no surprises." "Absolutely." "And you don't get to choose the restaurant." Alexander nodded. "Your rules." "Yes." He smiled. "Fair." They began walking toward the parking lot. Not holding hands. Not pretending everything was fixed. Just walking. Two imperfect people who had already learned one important lesson. Healthy love isn't the absence of conflict. It's the willingness to change how you handle conflict. And for Naomi and Alexander, that lesson was only beginning. Because the truth about the past had brought them closer in one way. But it had also created a new question. Could Naomi love the man Alexander was becoming without forgetting the man he had once been? And could Alexander accept that loving her meant allowing her to remember what happened, even when he desperately wished he could take the pain away? Their next test would answer that question, and it would come sooner than either of them expected. Naomi had expected the truth to make her angry. She hadn't expected it to make her tired. For several days after reading the Hartwell files, she moved through life with a strange sensation that she had been given a missing piece of herself. Nothing around her had changed. The same apartment, the same job, the same grocery store, the same school runs, the same morning coffee. Yet everything felt slightly different, because a question she'd carried for 8 years finally had an answer. Her father hadn't failed. She hadn't imagined what happened. They had been manipulated, and Alexander had unknowingly been the person whose signature made the entire thing possible. That last part was the hardest, because Alexander wasn't Richard Voss. He hadn't plotted against her father. He hadn't fabricated the numbers. He hadn't threatened her. But he had been the person at the top. The person who had the authority to ask more questions. The person who hadn't. Naomi sat at her kitchen table one Saturday morning, staring at an unopened letter. Sophie sat across from her eating pancakes. "Mom?" "Yeah?" "You're staring." "I know." "At nothing." Naomi smiled. "Sometimes adults do that." "Why?" "Because we're complicated." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "You're more complicated than most people." Naomi laughed. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Sophie reached for another pancake. Then she asked, "Are you going to see Alexander today?" Naomi looked at her. "I don't know." "Do you like him?" Naomi sighed. "Why do you keep asking me that?" "Because you keep not answering." Naomi smiled. "I do like him." Sophie grinned. "Good. But liking someone doesn't mean everything is easy." Sophie looked confused. "Why not?" Naomi thought about it. "Because people are complicated." Sophie shrugged. "Then just ask them what they want." Naomi smiled. You're 8. I know, and somehow, you're giving me relationship advice. Sophie returned to her pancakes. I'm wise. Naomi laughed. For a few minutes, the heaviness lifted. Then her phone rang. It was Alexander. She stared at the screen. Sophie looked at her. Answer it. Naomi gave her a look. You're very bossy. Answer it. Naomi smiled and picked up. Hello? Hi. His voice sounded different. Tired. Everything okay? Yes. She knew immediately that it wasn't. What happened? Alexander hesitated. The investigation is moving forward. Naomi's stomach tightened. How? We found evidence connecting several former executives to financial misconduct. And? One of them is Richard Voss. She closed her eyes. What does that mean? It means the company may pursue legal action. Naomi was silent. Then she asked, What does that mean for you? Probably nothing legally. Probably? I'm still reviewing everything. She heard something beneath his words. Fear. Not fear of losing money. Fear of confronting what his success had been built around. Alexander, yes? You don't have to protect me from this. I know. Do you? A pause. Yes. Naomi looked toward the window. Then tell me the truth. He exhaled. I've been wondering whether I should have done more 8 years ago. She didn't answer. I keep thinking about the acquisition. His voice became quieter. I remember the numbers, the meetings, the pressure. But I don't remember the people. Naomi swallowed. That matters. I know. Do you? Yes. There was pain in his voice now. I think that's what bothers me most. Naomi looked down. You can't remember every person affected by every decision. No. But you can remember that there were people. Alexander was silent. She continued. That's the part people forget. You're right. She closed her eyes. Thank you for telling me. I wanted you to know. I appreciate that. They stayed on the phone for another few minutes. Then Alexander said, Would you like to have dinner tonight? Naomi hesitated. Yes. His voice softened. Are you sure? No. He laughed quietly. You're becoming very honest. I'm trying. Me too. That evening, Alexander took Naomi to a small restaurant. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't exclusive. There were no photographers, no private dining room. Just a quiet neighborhood restaurant with wooden tables and soft lighting. Naomi looked around. I like this. I remembered. She looked at him. What? You said you don't like places where everyone is watching. She smiled. You remembered. I remember more than you think. The words touched her. They ate slowly. They talked about ordinary things. Sophie, work, books, the weather. For almost an hour, they avoided the past. Then Naomi finally said, Can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you become a billionaire? Alexander laughed softly. That's a complicated question. I have time. He looked down at his glass. My father owned a small construction company. Naomi listened. He wasn't wealthy. What happened? He made some bad decisions. Alexander's expression changed. He trusted the wrong people. Naomi felt a strange connection. He lost almost everything. What did you do? I started working. At what age? 17. She smiled. That's young. I didn't have much choice. Did he recover? No. Alexander looked toward the window. He died when I was 24. Naomi was quiet. I'm sorry. Thank you. What happened after? I built the company. Because you wanted money? He thought about it. At first. And later? Security. Naomi understood. You wanted to make sure nobody could take anything from you again. Alexander looked at her. Yes. There it was. The thing beneath all the money. Not greed. Fear. Naomi suddenly saw him differently. They were more alike than she had realized. She had built independence because she feared losing control. He had built wealth because he feared losing security. Different defenses. Same wound. Neither of them said it. They didn't need to. After dinner, they walked along the sidewalk. The night was cool. Naomi slipped her hands into her coat pockets. Alexander looked at her. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you leave corporate work? She was quiet. I didn't leave. He frowned. What? I was pushed out. Because of the complaint? She nodded. I didn't know that until now. Neither did I. She stopped walking. That's why I became a single mother who does everything herself. Alexander turned toward her. You were married? No. He waited. Naomi took a breath. Sophie's father left before she was born. Alexander's expression softened. Why? Because he didn't want the responsibility. She gave a small shrug. I stopped expecting people to stay. Alexander didn't know what to say. Naomi continued. So when my father lost everything, then my job disappeared, then Sophie's father left. She smiled sadly. I learned something. What? If I depend on myself, at least I know what I'm getting. Alexander nodded slowly. That makes sense? But it isn't healthy. She looked at him. I know that now. He didn't tell her she was wrong. He didn't promise to stay forever. He simply said, I'm glad you know. They continued walking. After several minutes, Naomi spoke again. I don't want you to rescue me. I know. I don't want your money. I know. I don't want you to fix my life. I know. She looked at him. Then what do you want? Alexander stopped. He looked directly at her. You. Naomi's breath caught. He continued before she could respond. Not because I think you need me. He stepped closer. Not because I want to save you. His voice softened. Because I like who you are. Naomi's eyes became wet. And if I never become easier? I don't need easy. If I get scared, we talk. If I pull away, I'll give you space. If I make mistakes, I'll tell you. She smiled through the emotion. And if you make mistakes? He laughed. You'll definitely tell me. She nodded. Good. They stood quietly beneath a streetlight. Alexander reached for her hand. He didn't grab it. He simply held his hand out. Naomi looked at it, then at him. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. It was the smallest gesture, but for Naomi, it meant more than a kiss. She was choosing to trust, not completely, not forever, just tonight. And sometimes, that was enough. The next morning, Alexander received a call that changed the situation. His investigator sounded serious. We found the person who authorized the altered employee reports. Who? Richard Voss. Alexander expected that. Then came the second part. But there's more. What? The orders didn't originate with Richard. Alexander stood. What do you mean? The emails were forwarded to him from someone at Reed Technologies. Alexander's face changed. Who? The investigator hesitated. Someone inside your company. Alexander felt cold. Name? A pause. Your father. Alexander froze. My father? Yes. The room suddenly seemed smaller. Alexander stared at the wall. His father had been dead for 15 years. He had spent his life believing the man was honorable, demanding, difficult, but honorable. That's impossible. We found the correspondence. What did he say? Not directly. What does that mean? He authorized an executive instruction that pressured Hartwell's management to remove certain employees before the acquisition. Alexander's heart pounded. Why? We don't know. He ended the call, then sat down. For years, Alexander had built his identity around his father's lessons. Work hard, trust carefully, never depend on anyone. Build something nobody can take from you. Now he was discovering that the man who taught him those lessons might have been involved in the decision that destroyed Naomi's family. Alexander looked at his phone. Naomi's name appeared. He wanted to call her, but he couldn't. Not yet, because the truth had just become more complicated. And this time, it wasn't just about Alexander. It was about the man whose shadow had shaped his entire life. His father. The person Alexander had spent years trying to become. And suddenly, he wasn't sure whether that was something to be proud of. That afternoon, Naomi arrived at the community center. She found Alexander waiting outside. She smiled. You didn't tell me you were coming? I didn't know I was. She laughed. That doesn't make sense. I know. He looked at her. There was something different in his eyes. What's wrong? Nothing. She frowned. You're lying. I need to tell you something. Her smile disappeared. Okay? Alexander took a breath. But before he could speak, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was his legal team. He answered. Yes? A voice on the other end said something. Alexander's expression changed. Naomi watched him carefully. Then he said, Send me everything. He ended the call. What happened? She asked. Alexander looked at her. For the first time since they met, he seemed genuinely lost. I just found out my father may have been involved in what happened to your family. Naomi stared at him. The world seemed to become very quiet. Neither of them moved. Neither spoke. Because suddenly, the past wasn't merely connected to Alexander. It was connected to the man who had taught him everything he knew about power. And Naomi was about to discover that the story she had believed for 8 years was even more complicated than she imagined. Naomi didn't speak. She simply stared at Alexander. His father's involvement was the last thing she had expected to hear. For 8 years she had carried one simple version of the story. Hartwell had been struggling. Reed Technologies had acquired it. People had been laid off. Her father had been among them. Alexander had signed the papers. It had been painful, but understandable. Now the story had changed. Someone inside Reed Technologies had apparently helped create the conditions that destroyed her father's career. And that someone might have been Alexander's father. The man who had built the company before Alexander ever took control. Naomi finally spoke. "You're sure?" "No." Alexander's voice was quiet. "I know what the investigator told me. I haven't seen the documents yet." "Then don't tell me something you don't know." "I know." She looked away. For once, she didn't want more information. She wanted less. She wanted the past to stop opening new doors. Alexander watched her. "I can take you home." "No." He stopped. "I don't want to leave." Alexander nodded. They stood outside the community center, while children laughed inside. The contrast felt strange. Inside, life was simple. Children were drawing pictures. Someone was preparing snacks. A volunteer was helping with homework. Outside, 2 adults were standing beneath a gray sky trying to understand how much damage the past could still cause. Naomi folded her arms. "Tell me what you know." Alexander took a breath. "My father was involved with Hartwell before the acquisition." "I know. He had financial interests connected to the company." "I didn't know that." "Neither did I." Naomi looked at him. "How could you not know?" "Because he died before I took over." "When?" 15 years ago." She looked down. "So he couldn't explain himself?" "No." "And you don't know why he did it?" "No." Naomi swallowed. "Then why are you telling me?" "Because I don't want to hide anything from you." She looked at him for several seconds. "Good." A strange sadness entered her expression. "Because I can't do secrets anymore." Alexander nodded. "I understand." "No." She shook her head. "You don't." He waited. "I spent years believing my father had failed because he couldn't recover after losing his job." Her voice trembled. "I thought maybe he wasn't strong enough." Alexander said nothing. "Then I found out he was targeted." She wiped beneath one eye. "Now I'm finding out the man who may have helped target him was your father." Alexander looked at the ground. "I'm sorry." Naomi shook her head. "Stop saying that." He looked up. "Why?" "Because you didn't do this." "Maybe not. But you carry his name." Alexander nodded. "I do. And I know what that's like." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "My father's name was attached to his job for 32 years. She looked toward the street. When the company decided he was disposable, they didn't just take his paycheck. They took the identity he'd built. Alexander understood. "That's why you hate what the company represents." "Partly." She turned toward him. "But it's also why I don't want to hate you." He looked surprised. Naomi continued. "I could make this easy." "How?" "I could decide you're your father." Alexander said nothing. "Then I wouldn't have to figure out what I actually think of you." Her eyes met his. "But that wouldn't be fair." Something in Alexander's expression softened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." She gave him a tired smile. "I'm still angry." "You have every right to be." "And confused." "I know. And scared." "I know." She shook her head. "There you go again." "What?" "Saying you know." Alexander smiled faintly. "Sorry." That made her laugh. It was quiet, almost reluctant, but it was a laugh. And somehow, that small sound made the situation feel slightly less impossible. That evening, Alexander returned to his father's old house. He hadn't been there in years. The property had been kept mostly untouched after his father's death. A caretaker maintained it. The furniture remained. The bookshelves remained. Even the old study remained exactly as Alexander remembered it. He stood in the doorway. For a moment, he was 17 again. His father sitting behind the desk. A newspaper in one hand. A cup of coffee beside him. "Success isn't about being liked, Alexander." His father's voice seemed almost real. "It's about being strong enough to make difficult decisions." Alexander had believed that. For years. Now he wondered whether his father had simply used those words to justify decisions that benefited himself. He walked to the desk. There were old financial records in a locked drawer. Alexander found the key in the study cabinet. The drawer opened. Inside were documents. Personal accounts, business agreements, old correspondence. Alexander began searching. Then he found it. A letter dated 8 years before the Hartwell acquisition. His father had written to Richard Voss. Alexander read it. The letter didn't explicitly order anyone to fire Daniel Carter, but it contained something worse. A reference to removing internal resistance before the transition. Alexander's hands tightened around the paper. Another document mentioned Daniel and Naomi. Her name appeared beside a note. Employee has demonstrated unusual awareness of vendor irregularities. Monitor closely. Alexander sat down. He stared at the words. Naomi hadn't been imagining things. She had known something was wrong, and someone had been watching her. He kept reading. Then he found a handwritten note from Richard. Mr. Reed wants this handled quietly. Alexander's heart sank. He read the sentence again. Mr. Reed, his father, not him. His father, but the distinction suddenly felt meaningless, because his family name had benefited from what happened. Alexander closed his eyes. He had spent his life believing that his father's wealth was the foundation of his own success. Now he wondered how much of that foundation had been built on people like Daniel Carter. The next morning, Alexander called Claire. I need you to prepare a full disclosure. She paused. Of what? My father's involvement with Hartwell. Alexander, I want everything documented. Are you sure? Yes. This could trigger lawsuits. I know. It could affect the company. I know. It could affect you personally. Alexander looked at the documents on his desk. It should. Claire was quiet. Then she asked, Are you doing this because of Naomi? Alexander considered the question. No. You're sure? Yes. He looked toward the window. I'm doing it because it's true. That distinction mattered. If Alexander confessed only because he wanted Naomi to forgive him, it would be another form of manipulation. But if he told the truth because the truth was right, even if Naomi walked away, then maybe he was finally becoming the person he claimed to be. Naomi spent the next day with her mother. They sat at the kitchen table in the house where Naomi had grown up. Her mother was older now, slower, but her eyes were still sharp. You've been thinking about your father. Naomi looked at her. How do you know? You're his daughter. Naomi smiled faintly. I found something. Her mother waited. Naomi explained what she'd learned. Her mother's hands became still. Your father always said something wasn't right. I know. He didn't want you involved. I remember. He told me to tell you to stop asking questions. Naomi looked down. I didn't listen. Her mother smiled sadly. Neither did he. They were quiet. Then her mother said something Naomi had never expected. Your father wasn't ashamed of losing his job. Naomi looked up. What? He was ashamed that he couldn't protect you. Naomi's eyes filled. Mum? He knew you had been asking questions. Her mother reached across the table. He worried they would hurt your career. Naomi swallowed. I thought he blamed himself. He blamed the people who did it. Why didn't he tell me? Because he was your father. Her mother's voice softened. He thought protecting you meant carrying the fear himself. Naomi closed her eyes. Suddenly, she understood something. Her father had done exactly what she had been doing for years. He had tried to protect the people he loved by keeping information from them. He had thought silence was protection. Naomi had done the same thing with Sophie. She hid financial worries. She hid fear. She hid exhaustion. She told her daughter everything was fine because she thought that was what a good mother did. Maybe she had inherited more than her father's stubbornness. Maybe she had inherited his belief that love meant carrying pain alone. The realization hurt, but it also taught her something. Protection without honesty can become another form of distance. That evening, Naomi called Alexander. He answered immediately. Hi. I talked to my mother. How is she? Okay. Naomi hesitated. She told me my father knew I was investigating the company. Alexander was silent. He knew. Yes. He tried to protect me. Alexander understood. Like I tried to protect you. Naomi smiled sadly. Exactly. They were quiet. Then Naomi asked, What are you going to do? I've asked the company to prepare a full disclosure. She stopped. About your father? Yes. Alexander, you don't have to do that. I know. Your company could be damaged. I know. You could lose money. I know. You could lose your reputation. I know. She exhaled. Why? Alexander's voice was steady. Because hiding the truth won't undo what happened. Naomi closed her eyes. And if I hate you afterward? There was a long pause. Then I'll accept that. Her eyes opened. You really mean that? Yes. Why? Because if I tell the truth only because I want you to love me, then I'm not really telling the truth. Naomi didn't speak. That was the moment something inside her shifted, not completely, not magically, but enough. Alexander wasn't asking her to forgive him. He wasn't asking her to stay. He was willing to tell the truth, even if the truth cost him her. That was different. Very different. 3 days later, the disclosure became public. The news spread quickly. Former executives were named. Financial irregularities were revealed. The Hartwell acquisition was placed under review. Alexander held a press conference. Naomi watched from her apartment. He stood behind a podium. Reporters shouted questions. Did you know? Did your father order the layoffs? How much money was involved? Will you resign? Alexander didn't avoid any of them. I didn't know at the time. He paused. But I should have known more. The room became quieter. My company benefited from decisions that harmed employees and their families. Whether those decisions were made lawfully or unlawfully, the impact was real. Naomi watched. Alexander continued. I cannot change what happened 8 years ago. He took a breath. But I can decide what happens now. He announced compensation for affected former employees, independent audits, and a review of executive practices. Some reporters challenged him. Some accused him of protecting the company's reputation. Others praised the transparency. Naomi didn't know which interpretation was correct, but she knew one thing. He hadn't hidden. He hadn't blamed everyone else. He had stood there and accepted responsibility for what he could own. Later that night, Alexander came to Naomi's apartment. He stood outside the door. He didn't knock twice. When Naomi opened it, he looked exhausted. She studied him. How are you? He smiled faintly. Not great. Good. He raised an eyebrow. Good? You finally admitted you're not great. He laughed. Fair? Naomi stepped aside. He entered. They stood in the living room. For several seconds, neither knew what to say. Then Naomi walked toward him. She didn't hug him. She didn't kiss him. She simply stood close enough that neither of them needed to pretend they were strangers. I'm still angry, she said. I know. I'm still hurt. I know. I don't know if I can forgive everything. You don't have to. She looked into his eyes. But I don't think you're your father. Alexander's expression changed. That sentence meant more to him than she realized. He nodded. Thank you. Naomi took a breath. And I don't think I'm my father either. What do you mean? I think I've been carrying his fear. Alexander listened. His fear of losing control. His fear of depending on people. His belief that protecting someone means hiding things. She looked at him. And I don't want to live that way anymore. Alexander stepped closer. Neither do I. Naomi smiled. For the first time, she reached for his hand. He held it gently. No rescue. No promises. No pretending. Just two people acknowledging that the truth had hurt them, and choosing not to let that pain make every decision for them. But neither of them knew that the next stage of their relationship would test something even harder than forgiveness. It would test whether Naomi could accept love without becoming dependent on it, and whether Alexander could love someone without believing that being needed was the same as being worthy. Their greatest challenge wasn't behind them. It was just beginning. Before we move into the next chapter, I want to ask you something. If you discovered that the person you loved was connected to a painful decision from your family's past, but you knew they weren't the one who intentionally caused it, could you separate the person they are today from the damage their family once caused? Tell me honestly in the comments, would you forgive Alexander, or would the past always stand between you? And if Naomi and Alexander's story is making you think about your own experiences with trust, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Because the biggest challenge isn't over. Naomi is beginning to trust Alexander, but trust doesn't mean forgetting. And Alexander is learning that loving someone doesn't give you the right to make decisions for them. Stay with us, because in the next chapter, their growing love will face a completely different test, and this time, neither of them will be able to hide behind the past. For the first time in a long time, Naomi allowed herself to enjoy something without immediately asking how it could go wrong. It happened on an ordinary Sunday morning. No crisis. No unexpected phone call. No bill waiting in her inbox. No conversation about Hartwell. Just sunlight coming through the kitchen window, while Sophie stood on a chair trying to reach a jar of peanut butter. Mom. Naomi looked over. What? I need help. Naomi smiled. With the peanut butter? Yes. It's right in front of you. I know. Then why are you asking me? Because you're my mother. Naomi laughed. Fair enough. She took the jar down. Sophie grinned. Thank you. You're welcome. Then the doorbell rang. Naomi glanced at the clock. 9:14 a.m. She wasn't expecting anyone. She walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Alexander stood outside, holding 2 paper bags. Naomi opened the door. "What are you doing here?" "Good morning to you, too." She smiled. "Good morning. I brought breakfast." Sophie appeared behind her. "What did you bring?" Alexander held up the bags. "Pancakes." Sophie gasped. "Mom!" Naomi sighed. "You've been replaced." Alexander smiled. "I've been trying to earn my position." Sophie ran toward the kitchen. Naomi shook her head. "You know you don't have to bring things every time you come here." "I know. Then why did you?" "Because I wanted pancakes." She narrowed her eyes. "Did you make them?" "No." "Good. Why?" "Because I like you." Alexander laughed. The morning passed easily. Sophie told Alexander about a science project. Naomi complained about the price of groceries. Alexander tried to convince them that buying bulk cereal was financially efficient. Naomi accused him of turning breakfast into a business meeting. It felt normal, almost too normal. And that was exactly what frightened Naomi. Normal had never lasted very long in her life. Whenever things became comfortable, she started looking for the hidden problem. She hated that part of herself, but she didn't know how to turn it off. Later that afternoon, Alexander took them to a small public park. He had specifically chosen somewhere ordinary. No private club, no expensive restaurant, no security team hovering nearby. Just families, children, dogs, and people walking beneath trees. Sophie ran ahead. Naomi and Alexander followed. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm thinking." "About?" She looked at him. "Us." He slowed. "Okay. I don't know what this is." Alexander nodded. "Neither do I." She smiled. "That's unusual for you." "I've learned." They continued walking. Naomi took a breath. "I like being with you. I like being with you too. And that's the problem." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because I like it too much." Alexander stopped. Naomi kept walking for 2 steps before realizing he wasn't beside her. She turned. He was watching her. "What?" "You're afraid." He frowned. "Of what?" "Of needing me." Naomi looked away. "Maybe." Alexander walked closer. "You don't have to." "I know." "Then what's wrong?" She hesitated. "When something becomes important, you have something to lose." Alexander understood. "Yes. I don't want to become the woman who can't function without a man." "You won't." "You don't know that." "No." He nodded. "But I know you." "Do you?" "I know you work when you're exhausted." She looked at him. "I know you say you're fine when you're worried." Her expression softened. "I know you check your bank account before buying something unnecessary." She laughed. "Okay. I know you don't like asking for help." "Definitely. And I know that when you're scared, you become more independent instead of less." Naomi looked at the ground. "You've been paying attention." "I told you I was." She smiled faintly. Alexander reached for her hand. This time, she let him take it. "I don't want to replace your independence," he said. "I know. I want to be part of your life." She looked at him. "That's what scares me." "Why?" "Because being part of someone's life means they can leave." Alexander was quiet. Then he said, "That's true." Naomi looked surprised. She had expected reassurance. He gave her truth. "I can't promise I'll never disappoint you," he continued. "I can't promise we'll never fight. I can't promise life won't change." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I can promise that if something is wrong, I'll talk to you instead of disappearing." Naomi's eyes became wet. "That's a big promise." "It's one I can actually keep." She nodded. That was the kind of promise she could believe. Not forever, not perfection, just communication. Over the next month, their relationship deepened. Naomi began meeting Alexander's friends. Alexander spent more time with Sophie. He helped her with a school project about bridges. Sophie decided Alexander knew everything because he was rich. Alexander corrected her. "I'm rich, not magical." Sophie frowned. "What's the difference?" "Rich people still get things wrong." She looked at Naomi. "Mom gets things wrong." Naomi gasped. "Excuse me." Sophie laughed. Alexander laughed too. It was a small moment, but Naomi watched him with Sophie and felt something shift inside her. Alexander wasn't trying to become Sophie's father. He didn't make promises to her daughter. He didn't try to buy her affection. He simply showed up. That mattered. Because Naomi had spent years watching people promise things they couldn't keep, Alexander seemed more interested in keeping small promises than making large ones. Yet the closer he became, the more Naomi's fear grew. She began imagining the future. And imagining the future meant imagining losing it. One night, Alexander asked her to stay at his house. Naomi froze. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't even particularly serious. They had been watching a movie. It was late. He simply said, "You don't have to drive home tonight." Naomi stared at him. "I'll be fine." "I know. I can stay." "I know." She picked up her purse. "I'm going home." Alexander didn't stop her. "Okay." She walked toward the door, then stopped. "You're not going to ask me to stay?" "No." "Why?" "Because you said you wanted to go home." Naomi turned. She couldn't explain why his respect made her emotional. She had spent years believing that love meant someone fighting to keep you. Now she was learning that sometimes love meant allowing someone to walk away without making them feel guilty. She nodded. "Good night." "Good night." She drove home. But halfway there, she pulled into a parking lot and sat in her car. She put her head against the steering wheel. What is wrong with me? She wasn't unhappy. She wasn't unsafe. Alexander hadn't done anything wrong. Yet she was terrified. Terrified of needing him. Terrified of losing him. Terrified of becoming dependent. And beneath all of that was another fear she hadn't admitted. She was afraid that if Alexander ever stopped loving her, she would have to discover who she was without him. That fear had nothing to do with Alexander. It belonged to her, and she knew it. The next morning, Naomi called her friend Elena. They had known each other since college. Elena listened quietly. "So, you're happy?" "Yes." "But you're scared." "Yes." "Why?" "I don't know." Elena laughed. "That's not true." Naomi sighed. "Fine." She stared out the window. "I'm scared because he has everything." "What does that mean?" "Money, power, connections. And I'm afraid I'll become dependent." Elena was quiet. Then she said, "Naomi, dependence and interdependence aren't the same thing." Naomi frowned. "Explain." "Dependence is when you believe you can't function without someone." "Okay." "Interdependence is when two people can function independently but choose to support each other." Naomi sat quietly. "I don't know if I can do that." "You don't have to know yet." Elena's voice softened. "Just don't punish Alexander for things he hasn't done." That sentence hit Naomi hard, because she realized she had been doing exactly that. She was reacting to the possibility of future pain instead of the reality of the present. Alexander hadn't abandoned her. He hadn't controlled her. He hadn't used money against her. He had actually done the opposite. He had respected her. Naomi closed her eyes. "You're right. I usually am. Don't ruin the moment." Elena laughed. That evening, Naomi met Alexander at his office. He was surprised to see her. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "I know. Is everything okay?" "Yes." She walked toward him. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For leaving so quickly last night." "You don't have to apologize." "I know." She smiled. "I'm trying to stop apologizing for everything." "Good." She stood in front of him. "I was scared." "I figured." "Not of you." "I know." She looked into his eyes. "I think I'm scared of how much I care." Alexander's expression softened. "I care too." "I know." She took a breath. "But I don't want us to rush." "We won't." "I want to keep my apartment." "Of course." "I want to keep working." "Of course." "I want to make my own decisions." "Absolutely." "And I want you to tell me when I'm pushing you away." Alexander nodded. "I can do that. Even if I'm angry. Especially then." Naomi smiled. "Okay." He reached for her hand. She took it. This time, she didn't feel trapped. She felt supported. And there was a difference. A very important one. For a while, things became easier. But healing rarely moves in a straight line. A few days later, Alexander received a call from his financial advisor. One of the company's major investments had suffered an unexpected loss. It wasn't enough to threaten his wealth, but it was significant. Alexander became distracted. Naomi noticed. She asked what was wrong. He said, "Nothing." She frowned. "You don't have to protect me." "I'm not." "Then tell me." He hesitated. "It's business." So I don't want to burden you with it." Naomi stared at him. Then she understood. He was doing the same thing she did. Keeping problems separate. Pretending that vulnerability was a burden. "You know," she said quietly, "you don't get to criticize me for hiding things if you're going to do the same." Alexander looked at her. She was right. He smiled. "Fair." He told her. She listened. She didn't offer financial advice. She didn't try to solve it. She simply listened. When he finished, she said, "That sounds stressful." "It is." "Do you want me to stay?" Alexander looked at her. Yes. So she stayed. Not because he needed rescuing. Not because she could fix his business. Just because sometimes the best thing two people can do for each other is remain present. That night, Naomi learned something important. Alexander didn't always need her strength. Sometimes he needed her honesty. And Alexander learned something too. Naomi wasn't only the woman he wanted to protect. She was a woman capable of standing beside him while he faced something difficult. That was partnership, not rescue, not dependence. Something healthier, something they were both still learning. But then Alexander made one decision without telling Naomi. He thought he was protecting her. He believed he was doing the right thing. And when Naomi found out, she would question whether everything they had built was really as healthy as she thought. Because sometimes the hardest lesson isn't learning how to trust someone. It's learning that even people who love you can still make choices that hurt you. And the question becomes whether they are willing to change after you tell them. For several weeks, Naomi and Alexander seemed to have found a rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They didn't see each other every day. Naomi kept her apartment. Alexander kept his home. They maintained separate routines, and somehow that made their relationship feel stronger. There was no rush to merge their lives simply because they had fallen in love. Naomi still took Sophie to school. She still went to work. She still managed her own finances. Alexander still ran his company. He still traveled. He still had meetings that lasted too long, and problems that followed him home. But now, at the end of certain days, there was someone to call. Someone who listened. Someone who didn't immediately try to solve everything. It was a new experience for both of them. And perhaps because it was new, neither noticed the small cracks beginning to form, until Alexander received an email on a Wednesday morning. It came from the principal of Sophie's school. The school was planning a scholarship and technology program for several students. Alexander's foundation was already one of the largest donors. The principal wanted to discuss expanding the program. Alexander agreed to a meeting. During the conversation, the principal mentioned Sophie. "She's very bright." Alexander smiled. "She is. She's also been asking about the summer science program." "I've heard." "The program is competitive. Would she qualify?" "Absolutely." Alexander listened. Then the principal mentioned the cost. It wasn't enormous by Alexander's standards, but it was more than Naomi could comfortably afford. Alexander didn't think much about it. He simply made a call. He arranged for the foundation to cover the cost anonymously. No publicity, no announcement, no mention of his name. He thought it was perfect. Naomi wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Sophie would get the opportunity. Nobody would know. Problem solved. Or so he thought. That evening, Naomi arrived at his apartment with Sophie. Sophie was excited. "Mom?" Naomi looked at her. "What?" "I got into the summer science program." Naomi smiled. "What?" "The one I told you about." "I thought you said applications weren't due until next month." "They were." Sophie looked at Alexander. "He helped." Naomi's smile disappeared. She looked at Alexander. "What did you do?" He immediately knew. "Naomi, what did you do?" "I spoke to the school." "And?" "The foundation covered the program." Silence. Sophie looked between them. Naomi forced a smile. "Sweetheart, can you go play in the other room for a minute?" "But, please." Sophie nodded reluctantly and walked away. The moment she was gone, Naomi turned back. "You paid for it. Through the foundation. That doesn't change anything. I didn't want you to worry about the cost. You didn't ask me. I knew you'd say no." Naomi stared at him. "Exactly. I didn't want money to stop Sophie from getting an opportunity. Neither do I. Then what's the problem?" She looked at him, as though he had missed something obvious. "The problem is that you made the decision." Alexander's expression tightened. "It was a scholarship. It was still a decision about my daughter. I didn't take anything away from you. You decided something that belonged to me. I was trying to help." "I know." She shook her head. "That's what makes it worse." Alexander became quiet. Naomi walked toward the window. "You promised me." "I know. You promised you'd ask. I thought this was different." "Why?" "Because it was for Sophie." Naomi turned. "And because you love her?" Alexander stopped. He hadn't expected the question. "I care about her." "I know. But she's not your daughter." He nodded. "I know. Then don't make decisions for her." Alexander looked down. "I thought I was doing something good." "I believe you." She took a breath. "But good intentions don't give you permission." He absorbed the words. They sounded painfully familiar. He had heard versions of them before, from employees, from Naomi, from his own conscience. But this time, the lesson was personal. "You should have asked me," she said. "You're right. Even if you knew, I might say no. You're right. Even if you thought I was making the wrong decision. You're right." Naomi's eyes softened slightly. "I don't want to fight with you. I don't either. But I need you to understand why this scares me." He nodded. "I do." "No." She shook her head. "I don't think you do." She walked closer. "When my father lost his job, nobody asked our family what we needed." Alexander remained silent. "They decided for us." She touched her chest. "That's what control feels like to me." His expression changed. "I understand now." Naomi shook her head. "You need to understand before you act." That hurt, because she was right. Alexander had spent years learning how to make decisions quickly. In business, hesitation could cost millions. But relationships weren't boardrooms. A person wasn't a variable. A family wasn't a balance sheet. And love wasn't permission. "I'll fix it," he said. Naomi immediately shook her head. "Don't." He stopped. "Don't fix it." He nodded slowly. "Okay. Let me handle it." She picked up her bag. "Good night." "Naomi." She stopped. "I'm sorry." She looked back. "I know." Then she left. Alexander stood alone in his apartment. For several minutes, he didn't move. Then Sophie walked out of the other room. "Is Mom mad?" Alexander crouched down. "She's upset with me." "Why?" "Because I made a decision I should have talked to her about." Sophie looked thoughtful. "Did you say sorry?" "Yes." "Did she say okay?" "No." Sophie nodded. "Then you have to wait." Alexander smiled faintly. "You're right." She walked closer. "Can I still go to the science program?" Alexander hesitated. "That's your mom's decision." Sophie smiled. "Good." Then she went back to her room. Alexander remained there. A billionaire had just been taught a lesson by an 8-year-old, and strangely, he needed it. The next morning, Alexander called the school. "I need to withdraw the foundation's payment." The administrator sounded confused. "Mr. Reed, the scholarship has already been approved." "I know. Is there a problem?" "Yes." He paused. "The student's mother needs to make that decision." The administrator hesitated. "Should we cancel the scholarship?" Alexander thought for a moment. "Keep the opportunity available." "But the funding—" "I'll replace it with an unrestricted community scholarship." "Understood." Alexander hung up. He had almost made the same mistake again. He had been trying to fix the situation himself. Instead, he stepped back. Naomi could decide whether Sophie would participate. Alexander could support the program without controlling who received it. That difference mattered. Naomi spent the next day thinking about their argument. She was still angry, but she also knew something. Alexander hadn't acted maliciously. He had acted according to a pattern. When he saw a problem, he solved it. When he saw a person he cared about struggling, he intervened. He had spent his entire life believing that was love. Maybe she couldn't expect him to unlearn it overnight, but she could expect him to try. That evening, she called him. He answered. "Hi." "Hi." Neither spoke for a moment. Then Naomi said, "I talked to the school." Alexander waited. "I'm going to let Sophie decide whether she wants to attend." "Okay. And if she does, we'll figure out the cost." "I understand." She smiled faintly. "You didn't ask if I needed money." "I almost did." She laughed. "Thank you for not." "I'm learning. I can tell." Silence. Then Alexander said, "I'm sorry. I know. I shouldn't have done it. And I understand why." Naomi sat down. "Good. I don't want you to think I'm going to keep doing things like that." "I don't." "You don't?" "I think you'll probably make the mistake again someday." Alexander laughed. "That's encouraging." "I'm being realistic." "I appreciate it." She smiled. "That's the thing." "What?" "You don't have to be perfect." He was quiet. "You just have to listen when I tell you something hurt." Alexander's voice softened. "I can do that. And I need to do the same for you." "Meaning?" "If I get scared and pull away, you can tell me." "Okay. Don't just disappear." "I won't." They sat in silence. Then Alexander asked, "Can I see you?" Naomi smiled. "Tomorrow." "Okay. Good night." "Good night." She ended the call. For the first time, the conflict didn't feel like a threat to their relationship. It felt like information. They had discovered something about each other. Alexander had learned that generosity could become control. Naomi had learned that setting a boundary didn't require abandoning the relationship. Both were uncomfortable lessons. Both were valuable. The next afternoon, they met at a small cafe. Alexander arrived first. Naomi walked in 5 minutes later. He stood. Hi. Hi. They sat. I brought something. Naomi looked suspicious. What? He slid a small envelope across the table. He frowned. What's that? Nothing you need to worry about. She opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. From Sophie. Thank you for helping me believe I can do science. Naomi looked at Alexander. She wrote that? Yes. Why? She wanted to. Naomi smiled. You didn't ask her to? No. She read the note again, then placed it carefully in her purse. Thank you. Alexander nodded. They ordered coffee. For the first time in days, the tension between them eased. Then Naomi asked, Can I tell you something? Of course. I think I've been using independence as armor. Alexander listened. I tell myself I don't need anyone because I don't want to be disappointed. She looked down. But sometimes I push away people who haven't given me a reason to leave. Alexander nodded. I understand. And I don't want to do that to you. He reached across the table. She took his hand. You don't have to promise me forever, she said. I won't. You don't have to promise you'll never hurt me. I can't. You just have to promise you'll tell me the truth. I will. She smiled. That's enough. Their hands remained together. No grand declaration. No perfect solution. Just two people agreeing to communicate before fear made decisions for them. That night, Alexander drove Naomi home. They sat outside her apartment for several minutes. Neither seemed eager to leave. Naomi looked at him. Are you happy? He thought about it. Yes. Really? Yes. Why? He smiled. Because I don't feel like I have to earn it. Naomi understood. Alexander had spent most of his life believing that achievement created worth. More money, more success, more control. But relationships had shown him something different. Sometimes, happiness came from simply being known. Naomi leaned closer. Their foreheads nearly touched. Then they kissed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was gentle. A kiss between two people who knew exactly how fragile trust could be. When they pulled apart, Naomi smiled. Good night. Good night. She opened the door, then turned. Alexander? Yes? Thank you for learning. He smiled. Thank you for teaching me. She disappeared inside. Alexander watched the door close. He sat there for a moment, then drove away. Neither of them knew that the next challenge wouldn't come from money. It wouldn't come from the past. It wouldn't even come from another person. It would come from something much more difficult. Naomi would have to decide whether she could build a future without constantly preparing herself for its ending. And Alexander would have to learn that loving someone sometimes meant allowing them to struggle without rushing in to save them. Their relationship had survived its first serious conflict. But surviving wasn't the same as healing, and both of them were about to discover the difference. The first time Naomi realized she was becoming dependent on Alexander, it wasn't because he paid a bill. It wasn't because he bought her anything. It wasn't because she moved into his house. It was something much smaller. She reached for her phone after a difficult day and thought, I need to call Alexander. Then she stopped, not because she didn't want to, because she wondered what would happen if one day she couldn't. Naomi sat in her car outside Sophie's school, staring at the steering wheel. It was nearly 5:30 p.m. The parking lot was almost empty. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. She had received an email that afternoon from her employer. The company was restructuring. Her department was being reviewed. Nothing was official yet, but Naomi knew what that language meant. She had heard it 8 years earlier. Restructuring, efficiency, organizational changes, words that sounded harmless until they appeared beside your name. She had spent the entire afternoon trying not to panic. She had told herself she would be fine. She had enough savings for a few months. She could find another job. She had survived worse, but her hands were trembling. She looked at her phone. Alexander's name was there. She could call him. He would answer. He would probably know someone hiring. He could probably make one phone call and open 5 doors. And that was exactly why she didn't want to call. Because the solution would be too easy. And she was afraid that one easy solution would become 10. Then 20. Then one day she'd wake up and realize she had stopped solving her own problems. She put the phone down. 5 minutes later, it rang. Alexander. Naomi stared at the screen. She answered. Hi. Hi. You okay? She closed her eyes. No. The honesty surprised her. Alexander was silent for a second. Do you want to talk? Yes. She told him about the email. He listened. When she finished, he asked, "Do you know if your position is actually at risk?" "Not yet." "Then let's wait for the information before assuming the worst." Naomi smiled weakly. "You're sounding very reasonable." "I'm trying." "That's new." "I've been practicing." She laughed. The tension in her shoulders loosened. Then Alexander asked, "Do you want me to look into opportunities?" Naomi immediately stiffened. "No." "Okay. I mean it." "I know. I don't want you calling anyone." "I won't." "I don't want you sending my resume anywhere." "I won't." "I don't want you talking to investors." "I won't." Alexander paused. "Then what do you want?" Naomi looked out at the rain. "I just want you to listen." "Okay." So he listened. For almost 30 minutes. He didn't offer a solution. He didn't tell her who to call. He didn't mention money. He simply stayed on the phone. When they ended the call, Naomi felt better. Not because her problem had disappeared, because she had carried it with someone else for a little while. And perhaps that was what healthy support was supposed to feel like. Not someone taking the weight away. Someone helping you remember you weren't carrying it alone. 2 weeks later, Naomi's fears became reality. Her position was eliminated. She received the news in a conference room with beige walls and a bowl of untouched candy. Her manager looked uncomfortable. "We really value your work." Naomi almost smiled. She had heard those words before. "Thank you. We'll provide severance." She nodded. "Okay. We can also provide references." "Thank you." The meeting lasted 12 minutes. Her career disappeared in 12 minutes. When she walked out, she felt strangely calm. Not because it didn't hurt, because she had lived through this before. She packed her desk. A photograph of Sophie, a coffee mug, 2 notebooks, a small plant, a framed certificate, nothing else. Outside the building, she called Alexander. He answered immediately. "Naomi, I lost my job." Silence. Then, "Are you okay?" She laughed softly. "Not really. I'm coming." "No." He paused. "What?" "Don't come." "Okay. I need to handle this." "Okay. And I don't want you to fix it." "I won't." She closed her eyes. "Thank you. Do you want me to stay on the phone?" "Yes." So, he stayed. She walked 3 blocks before she realized she was crying. Not because she was helpless. Because she was exhausted. 8 years ago, losing her job had felt like the end of the world. Now, it felt like another difficult chapter. That was progress. She had more confidence, more experience, a daughter who loved her, a small home, people she trusted, and someone on the other end of the phone who wasn't trying to take over. The next morning, Naomi created a plan. She wrote everything down. Monthly expenses, savings, severance, job applications, potential freelance work, childcare. She looked at the numbers. It wasn't comfortable, but it was manageable. She called Alexander. "I made a budget." "Good. I can manage for 4 months without income." "That's good. I'm going to start applying today." "Okay." She waited. He didn't say anything else. Finally, she laughed. "You're really trying." "I am. You're not going to say you know someone." "I know people." She laughed. "But I'm not calling them." "Thank you. You should be proud of me." "I am." The warmth in his voice made her smile. That evening, Alexander came over. He brought dinner. Nothing expensive. Just takeout from a restaurant near Naomi's apartment. Sophie was excited. "Alexander." "Hi. Did you bring noodles?" "Yes. You're my favorite." Naomi looked at him. "Later." Sophie laughed. They ate around the small dining table. It was one of those evenings that felt ordinary, almost domestic, and Naomi loved it. Perhaps too much, because when Alexander left, the apartment suddenly felt quieter. Naomi stood at the window and watched his car disappear. She realized she had begun measuring good days, partly by whether Alexander was in them. That thought frightened her. She wanted him, but she didn't want to need him. There was a difference, wasn't there? The following week, Naomi received 3 job interviews. 2 went well, 1 didn't. She kept applying. Alexander didn't interfere. He sent 1 message each morning. "Good luck today." Nothing more. She appreciated it. Then one Friday afternoon, everything changed. Naomi received an offer. A good one. Better salary than her previous job. More flexible hours. Health insurance. She stared at the email. She had gotten it herself. No Alexander. No billionaire connection. No favor. Just her experience. She called him. "I got a job." There was a pause. Then Alexander laughed. "I knew you would. I did it." "You did?" "I actually did it." I'm proud of you. Naomi smiled. Thank you. They agreed to celebrate that evening. Alexander picked her up. They went to dinner. Naomi felt lighter than she had in months. She talked about her new position. Alexander listened. Then he said, "You'll be excellent." She smiled. "I hope so." "You will." The waiter brought their food. Everything felt perfect. Then Alexander's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression changed. Excuse me." He stepped away. Naomi watched him. His conversation lasted 5 minutes. When he returned, his face was tense. "What happened?" "Nothing," she phoned. "You don't look like nothing." "It's business." "Okay." He sat down, but his mind was somewhere else. Naomi didn't push. She had learned that people sometimes needed a moment. After dinner, they left. In the car, Alexander finally spoke. "One of my companies is having serious problems." "How serious?" "Potentially significant." "Can I help?" He smiled faintly. "Not unless you know how to restructure a technology company." "I don't." "Then probably not." She laughed. "Fair." But the next morning, Naomi discovered something. Alexander hadn't told her the full story. His company wasn't merely having a bad quarter. One of his major subsidiaries was facing a lawsuit. A major investor was threatening to withdraw. The situation could cost him hundreds of millions. Naomi found out because the story appeared in the news. She stared at the headline. Reed Technologies faces major investor crisis. Her first instinct was to call Alexander. Then she stopped. Why hadn't he told her? She understood the irony immediately. He had been doing exactly what she did, protecting the other person from his problems. She called him. "Why didn't you tell me?" He was silent. "I saw the news. I didn't want to burden you." Naomi almost laughed. "Are you serious?" "I know." "No." She shook her head. "You don't get to do this." "I know. You're always telling me I don't have to carry everything alone." "I know. And now, you're hiding things from me." "I didn't want you worrying." "That's not your decision." Alexander sighed. "You're right." She sat down. "I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to trust me enough to let me know when you're struggling." "I do trust you." "Then tell me." He was quiet. Finally, "I'm scared." Naomi's anger disappeared. "What?" "I'm scared." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I've never had a company this vulnerable." She listened. "I'm afraid I'll lose something I've spent my whole life building." Naomi closed her eyes. "Then you don't have to face that alone. I don't want you to feel responsible." "I'm not." She paused. "I just want to be there." He took a breath. "Okay." That evening, Naomi went to Alexander's apartment. He was sitting alone in the living room. His laptop was open. Papers covered the table. He looked exhausted. She walked over. "Have you eaten?" "No." "Of course you haven't." She put a bag on the table. "I brought food." He looked at her. "You didn't have to." "I know." A small smile appeared. "You're learning too." She nodded. "Apparently." They sat together. Alexander explained the situation. Naomi didn't understand every financial detail. She didn't need to. She listened. At one point, Alexander looked at her. "Why are you still here?" She frowned. "Because you asked me to stay." "I didn't." "You didn't have to." He looked away. Naomi moved closer. "You're always trying to make sure everyone else is okay." She touched his hand. "Let someone do that for you sometimes." His eyes became wet. He looked down. "I don't know how." "I know." She smiled. "But you can learn." He nodded. They sat quietly. Then Alexander said, "There's something I need to tell you." Naomi waited. "I've been considering selling one of my companies." She looked surprised. "Why?" "To protect the rest." "Does that mean you'll lose it?" "Maybe." She squeezed his hand. "Then we'll figure out what comes next." Alexander looked at her. "We?" Naomi smiled. "Yes. But you don't have to." "I know." She held his gaze. "I'm choosing to." Something in Alexander's face changed. For years, he had believed being needed was proof of love. Now, Naomi was showing him something better. She wasn't helpless. He wasn't her rescuer. She simply wanted to stand beside him. And that was different, much different. But later that night, after Naomi fell asleep on his couch, Alexander sat alone in the dark. He looked at her sleeping peacefully. He thought about her new job, her independence, her strength. Then he thought about the financial crisis, and a dangerous idea entered his mind. He could solve it, not just for himself, for Naomi too. If he sold the company, It would be painful. If he made one strategic acquisition, however, he could protect the business. And if he used some of his private resources, he could ensure Naomi never had to worry about money again. The thought seemed loving, protective, practical. But Alexander had learned enough to know that sometimes the most dangerous decisions were the ones that looked like kindness. He stared at Naomi. He knew what she would say. Don't decide for me. He also knew what his instincts were saying. Protect her. For the first time, Alexander wasn't sure which voice to follow. And before morning came, he would make a decision that could change everything. Not because he didn't love Naomi, but because he loved her, and still hadn't completely learned that love without respect could become another form of control. At 5:17 the next morning, Alexander made a decision. He would protect the company. He would protect Naomi. And, in his mind, he would do both without asking anyone to carry the consequences. By 7 a.m., he had called his financial advisor. By 8:15, his attorneys were reviewing the structure of a private transaction. By 10:30, he had moved enough personal capital to stabilize the subsidiary. By noon, the immediate crisis was contained. The business press began reporting that Reed Technologies had secured additional liquidity. Investors calmed down. Employees stopped panicking. Alexander should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt uneasy. Because there was one part of his plan he hadn't told Naomi. He had quietly arranged for a trust to be established for her and Sophie. Nothing extravagant by his standards. Enough to cover housing, education, emergencies and long-term security. He had convinced himself it wasn't about control. It was protection. Naomi had spent years struggling. She had just lost her job. She had a child. She was starting again. Why shouldn't he make sure she never had to worry about money again? He could do it anonymously. She wouldn't even have to know immediately. He could structure it so she maintained complete control. At least, that was what he told himself. But beneath all those explanations was a simpler truth. Alexander was afraid. Afraid of watching someone he loved struggle. Afraid of losing her. Afraid that if he didn't protect her, something would happen that he couldn't undo. So he did what he had always done when he was afraid. He acted. He solved. He controlled. And he forgot to ask. Naomi woke on Alexander's couch at 7:42. She sat up slowly. A blanket covered her. Alexander was already gone. She found him in the kitchen. Morning. He turned. Morning. You were awake? Most of the night. Why? Work. She narrowed her eyes. How bad is it? It's handled. She smiled. That was fast. Alexander poured coffee. We had a good team. Naomi nodded. She didn't question him. Not yet. She trusted him. And perhaps that was why what happened next hurt so much. 2 days later, Naomi received a call from a financial advisor. Ms. Carter? Yes? My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm calling regarding a financial trust that has been established in your name. Naomi froze. I'm sorry? A trust has been created for you and your daughter. She stood from her desk. By whom? There was a pause. Mr. Alexander Reed. Everything inside her went still. How much? The advisor told her. Naomi couldn't process the number. It wasn't merely generous. It was life-changing. She closed her eyes. Does Alexander know I'm being contacted? Yes. Did he ask me? No. Her chest tightened. Thank you. She ended the call. For several minutes, she sat motionless. Then she called Alexander. He answered. Hi. Did you create a trust for me? Silence. Naomi. Yes or no? Yes. Her eyes filled with anger. Why? I wanted you and Sophie to have security. I didn't ask for it. I know. Then why did you do it? I was trying to make sure you didn't have to worry about money. You don't get to decide that. I know. No, Alexander. Her voice shook. You keep saying you know after you do exactly what I asked you not to do. He closed his eyes. I thought this was different. How? It's not a job. It's not your daughter. It's your financial security. She laughed bitterly. You still don't understand. Help me understand. You think because you have money, you can remove every difficult thing from my life. I don't. You do. He was silent. Naomi continued. I've spent years building a life that belongs to me. I know. You can't just come into that life and decide which problems I'm allowed to have. I wasn't trying to take your life away. But you were trying to redesign it. The words landed. Alexander had no defense. Because she was right. He had taken a fear she had shared with him and turned it into a problem he could solve with money. He had never asked whether she wanted the solution. He had simply decided that because he could help, he should. Naomi's voice became quieter. Do you know what scares me most? What? That part of me was relieved when I heard about the trust. Alexander's expression changed. What? He swallowed. I thought about what it would mean. She wiped her eyes. No more worrying about rent. No worrying about Sophie's college. No worrying about what happens if I lose another job. She laughed softly. For 5 minutes, I felt safe. Alexander said nothing. And then I realized what that safety would cost me. It wouldn't cost you anything. It would cost me something. She looked down. Every time I disagreed with you, I'd wonder whether I was risking everything. Alexander's heart sank. I would never do that. I know. She took a breath. But I don't want to build a life where I have to trust myself not to worry about your power. He sat down. Naomi, I need you to understand something. I'm listening. I don't need you to make my life easy. Her voice broke. I need you to respect that it's mine. Silence. Alexander stared at the floor. He had heard those words before. But this time, they cut deeper. Because he had thought he had finally understood. Apparently, he hadn't. You're right, he said. Naomi didn't answer. I'm sorry. She closed her eyes. I believe you. Then what do you need? I need you to cancel it. He hesitated. It's already established. Then dissolve it. Okay. She looked surprised. Okay? Yes. You won't argue. No. You won't try to convince me? No. Why? Alexander looked at her. Because I, finally, understand. She waited. Helping you isn't helping if it makes you feel like you owe me. Naomi's eyes filled again. Thank you. I love you. She froze. Alexander did too. He hadn't planned to say it. It simply came out. The words hung between them. Naomi's breathing changed. He didn't repeat them. He didn't ask her to say them back. Instead, he said, You don't have to answer. She looked down. I love you too. Alexander closed his eyes. But Naomi continued. And I need you to learn that loving me doesn't mean protecting me from every difficult thing. I will. I hope so. They ended the call. Not because they were breaking up. Because sometimes a conversation needed to end before two people said things they weren't ready to understand. That evening, Alexander went for a walk. No security, no driver, just him. He walked through a neighborhood near the river. People were sitting outside restaurants. Children rode bicycles. A couple argued quietly near a bench. An elderly man fed birds. Ordinary life continued. Alexander thought about the trust. He had seen money as a solution. Naomi had seen it as a possible source of dependence. Both perspectives were valid. That was the problem. He had assumed his intention was enough. It wasn't. He had to consider how his actions affected the person receiving them. That was something he should have learned in business. But somehow, business had allowed him to hide from that lesson. When you transferred millions of dollars, you saw numbers. When you gave someone a trust fund, you could call it generosity. But when you looked into someone's eyes and saw them wondering whether accepting your money meant surrendering their freedom, the transaction looked different. Alexander stopped beside the river. He called his attorney. Cancel the trust. Are you sure? Yes. And the assets? Return them to my personal account. Understood. Alexander ended the call. Then he stood there for several minutes. He felt strangely lighter. Not because he had solved the problem, because he had stopped trying to. 3 days later, Naomi met him at a park. They sat on separate ends of a bench. She looked tired. He looked tired too. You cancelled it? Yes. Completely. She nodded. Thank you. I also changed something else. What? I've asked my foundation to create an independent emergency fund for single parents in the community. Naomi frowned. With no connection to me? None. How does that help? It doesn't help you specifically. She smiled. Good. Alexander laughed. But it might help someone who needs it. Naomi nodded. That's different. I know. They sat quietly. Then Alexander said, I thought I was protecting you. I know. I was actually protecting myself. She looked at him. From what? From feeling helpless. Naomi's expression softened. You've spent your whole life being able to solve things. Yes. And when you couldn't solve something, I felt useless. She nodded. That's something you have to work on. I know. She smiled. You're getting better at that phrase. I've had practice. They both laughed. The tension eased. Then Naomi reached for his hand. He held it. I don't want to leave you, she said. I don't want you to. But I need us to be careful. We will. I need to keep my job. Of course. I need my own apartment. Of course. I need my own money. Of course. And sometimes, I might say no to you. I hope you do. She looked at him. Why? Because if you stop saying no, I'll know we're doing something wrong. Naomi smiled. That answer meant more than any expensive gift could have. Over the next few weeks, their relationship became quieter. Stronger, too. Alexander learned to ask before helping. Naomi learned to ask before assuming he was trying to control her. When he offered help, she could say no. When she needed support, she could say yes. Neither reaction became a referendum on the relationship. That was progress. One afternoon, Naomi received an email from her new employer. Her probation period was complete. They wanted to promote her. She stared at the message, then called Alexander. I got promoted. He laughed. I knew it. No. What? You don't get to say you knew. Why? Because I did this one. He smiled. You're right. I did it myself. I know, she laughed. I love hearing you say that. He smiled. Then I'll keep saying it. That evening they celebrated with dinner at home. Naomi cooked. Alexander attempted to help. He nearly burned the vegetables. She laughed until she cried. You are terrible. I warned you. You said you could cook. I said I could follow instructions. That is not the same thing. Sophie walked into the kitchen. What happened? Alexander burned dinner. Sophie looked at him. You're fired. Alexander laughed. Naomi leaned against the counter. For a moment, she looked at the two people she cared about most. Her daughter, and the man she had once believed she could never trust. She realized something. Her life wasn't perfect. She still had fears. Alexander still had habits to unlearn. Sophie still needed guidance. Bills still arrived. Work was still unpredictable. The past still existed. But life didn't need to become easy to become good. Sometimes progress meant having the same fears and responding to them differently. Later that night, after Sophie went to bed, Naomi and Alexander sat on the balcony. The city was quiet. Alexander looked at her. Are you happy? Naomi thought about it. Yes. Even with everything? She nodded. Because I finally understand something. What? I used to think being strong meant never needing anyone. Alexander listened. Now I think being strong means knowing who you can trust without giving away yourself. He smiled. That's a good definition. I stole it from experience. Experience is expensive. Very. He laughed. Then Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder. Alexander didn't move. He didn't try to turn the moment into something more. He simply let her rest there. And that was another kind of progress. For Alexander, love was becoming less about doing. For Naomi, love was becoming less about defending. Neither had completely healed. Neither was supposed to have. But they were learning. And that was enough. Until the next morning, when Naomi received a phone call from her mother. Her voice sounded frightened. Naomi, I need you to come home. Naomi sat upright. What happened? It's about your father. Her heart dropped. Mom, what is it? I found something. What? A long silence followed. Then her mother said, Your father left a letter. Naomi's breath caught. What kind of letter? I don't know. Her mother's voice trembled. But it has Alexander's father's name on it. Naomi looked across the room. Alexander was still asleep. She stared at him. The peaceful expression on his face suddenly seemed painfully distant. Because just when they thought they had finally made peace with the past had found another way back to them. And this time, it might contain the one truth neither of them was prepared to hear. Naomi didn't wake Alexander. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at him for several seconds. He was asleep. For once, his face wasn't carrying the weight of a company, a family name, or 1,000 decisions. He looked peaceful. Naomi hated the thought of disturbing that peace. But her mother's voice was still in her mind. Your father left a letter. And somehow, Alexander's father's name was on it. She quietly got dressed. Before leaving, she wrote a note. I had to see my mother. I'll call you. She almost added more. She didn't. She drove to her mother's house, alone. Her mother was waiting at the kitchen table. An old brown envelope sat in front of her. Naomi stopped when she saw it. That's it? Her mother nodded. Where did you find it? In your father's study. I thought we'd gone through everything. So did I. Naomi sat. Her mother pushed the envelope toward her. His handwriting. Naomi recognized it immediately. Her father's handwriting had always been distinctive. Strong, slightly slanted, careful. She touched the envelope. Her fingers trembled. Did you read it? No. Why? Her mother looked at her. Because it belongs to you. Naomi opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter. The date was 8 years old. Her heart began pounding. She unfolded it. The first line read, Naomi, if you're reading this, then something happened that I hoped you would never have to understand. She stopped. Her eyes filled. She continued. Her father explained that he had discovered financial irregularities at Hartwell months before the acquisition. He had tried to report them. Richard Voss had dismissed his concerns. But Daniel had kept copies. He had also discovered that certain executives were planning to move money before the acquisition. The letter became harder to read. Her father wrote that he believed someone powerful was involved. Someone connected to the company that would eventually acquire Hartwell. Naomi's breathing became shallow. Then she reached the final paragraph. I don't know whether the people above me understand what is happening. I don't believe Alexander Reed's father would knowingly destroy innocent employees. But if something happens to me, don't assume everyone involved knew the truth. Some people may simply have trusted the wrong person, as I did. Naomi stopped. She read the sentence again, then again. Her mother watched silently. What does it mean? Naomi whispered. I don't know. Naomi looked at the letter. Her father hadn't accused Alexander's father. He had actually left room for uncertainty. He had believed someone had manipulated the situation, someone who might have deceived everyone. Naomi closed her eyes. She had spent days thinking the truth was simple. It wasn't. It never had been. She called Alexander. He answered immediately. Naomi? I found the letter. His voice changed. What's in it? She told him. He listened, without interrupting. When she finished, there was silence. Are you okay? No. I'm coming. Don't. He stopped. Why? I need to understand this first. I understand. She almost smiled. There it was again. He was learning. Can you send me a copy? Yes. I'll have the investigators verify everything. No. Alexander paused. No? I don't want another investigation yet. Why? Because I don't want my father's life turned into another corporate case. He understood. Okay. She took a breath. But I do want you to read it. I will. I want to know what you think. I'll tell you. Honestly. Always. They ended the call. Naomi looked at her mother. Do you think Dad knew who was responsible? Her mother shook her head. I think your father knew something was wrong. But not who. Probably. Naomi looked down at the letter. Why didn't he tell me? Her mother smiled sadly. He was trying to protect you. Naomi closed her eyes. Again, that word, protection. She was beginning to understand how complicated it could become. Her father had hidden information because he loved her. Alexander had hidden information because he loved her. She had hidden her own struggles from Sophie because she loved her. None of them had intended to cause harm. And yet secrecy had created distance in every case. Maybe love without communication wasn't enough. Maybe good intentions weren't enough either. Alexander read the letter that afternoon. He sat alone in his office. When he finished, he didn't move. His father might not have known. The letter suggested it. But Alexander couldn't ignore another possibility. His father may have known enough to suspect something and chosen not to investigate. That was still a failure. Maybe not the same kind as deliberate wrongdoing, but still a failure. Alexander called Claire. I want the original Hartwell due diligence records. We already have them. I want the full chain of communication. We're still reviewing. Stop. Claire paused. Why? Because we're looking at the wrong question. What question should we be asking? Alexander looked at his father's letter. Who knew what and when? Claire understood. You're looking for intent. No. He shook his head. I'm looking for responsibility. 2 days later, Alexander and Naomi met at the same coffee shop where they had first discussed the Hartwell documents. Neither sat immediately. Naomi placed the letter on the table. Alexander looked at it. Did you read it? Yes. And? He took a breath. I think my father may not have known everything. Naomi nodded. That's what I think too. But that doesn't make him innocent. No. She sat. Alexander sat across from her. I think he trusted Richard Voss. Maybe. I also think he may have ignored warning signs. Naomi looked at him. Why? Because he was focused on getting the acquisition completed. She nodded slowly. So he made a choice. Yes. Even if he didn't know everything. Yes. Naomi looked out the window. That's what scares me. What? That people don't always have to be evil to hurt you. Alexander didn't answer. She continued, "Sometimes they just don't pay enough attention." He nodded. "That's what I've been learning." They sat quietly. Then Naomi said, "I don't want to punish you for your father's mistakes." Alexander looked at her. But I need you to understand why I can't simply erase what happened. I don't want you to. Even if it means I need time? Yes. Even if I don't know whether I can forgive everyone involved? Yes. Even if I sometimes get angry? Yes." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because the first love you." Naomi's eyes softened. "And because I finally understand that loving you doesn't mean controlling how you process what happened." She smiled faintly. "You really are learning." "I'm trying." For several months, Naomi had imagined forgiveness as a single moment. One day, she would wake up, and everything would feel different. She would stop thinking about her father, stop feeling angry, stop remembering the past. But that wasn't happening. Instead, forgiveness was becoming something quieter, a decision she made repeatedly. Some days she could forgive, other days she couldn't. Some days Alexander's family name didn't bother her. Other days, hearing the word Reed made her stomach tighten. She was beginning to understand that progress could be uneven without being fake. That weekend, Alexander invited Naomi to his family home, not his current house, the old family estate, the place where he had grown up. Naomi hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Why?" "I think you should see where I came from." She nodded. When they arrived, the house looked almost exactly as Alexander remembered. Large windows, dark wood, a long driveway, beautiful gardens. But Naomi noticed something immediately. It didn't feel warm. It felt impressive, not lived in. Alexander walked her into his father's study. This is where he worked. Naomi looked around. She imagined the man who had been so powerful. Then she looked at Alexander. "You look like him." Alexander smiled faintly. "Everyone says that. Does that bother you?" "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because I spent years trying to become him." Naomi looked at him. "And now?" "I don't know who I want to become." She stepped closer. "Maybe that's a good thing." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because now you get to choose." The words affected him more than she knew. Alexander looked around the study. Then he noticed something. A small wooden box on a shelf. He hadn't seen it before. He reached for it. Inside were old letters. One envelope had his father's handwriting. Alexander opened it. His expression changed. Naomi watched. "What?" He read, silently, then handed it to her. The letter was addressed to Richard Voss. It was dated 3 weeks before the Hartwell acquisition. The words were brief. "Richard, I have reviewed the concerns raised by Daniel Carter. Proceed carefully. If his claims are accurate, we cannot allow the transition to continue without clarification. I will not approve any action against him until the accounts are independently reviewed." Naomi stared at the page. Her hands shook. Then why did the acquisition happen? Alexander didn't know. Something changed. She looked at the date. 3 weeks. Alexander nodded. "Between this letter and the acquisition." Naomi looked at him. "Find out." "I will." "No." She shook her head. "We will." Alexander looked surprised. Naomi continued. "I don't want you carrying this alone." He smiled. "Okay." They stood together in the old study. For once, neither was trying to protect the other from the truth. They were choosing to face it together. And perhaps that was what their relationship had been moving toward all along. Not rescue. Not dependence. Partnership. The following weeks brought new evidence. A former Hartwell accountant came forward. She remembered a meeting. Richard Voss had entered the room with another executive, a man from Reed Technologies. She couldn't remember his name, but she remembered something else. He had carried a black leather briefcase, and he had said one sentence. "Mr. Reed wants this completed before the audit." Alexander immediately recognized the implication. His father had ordered an audit. Someone had stopped it. But who? The investigator searched old records, then found the name. Michael Grant, Alexander's father's former chief financial advisor, a man who had disappeared from the company 6 months after the acquisition. Alexander knew where he lived. And suddenly, the past had a face again. Naomi and Alexander drove together to meet him. They didn't know what they would find. They didn't know whether Michael would tell the truth. They didn't know whether the final answers would bring peace or more pain. But for the first time, neither of them was trying to outrun uncertainty. They were walking toward it. When they arrived at Michael's home, an elderly man opened the door. He looked at Alexander, then at Naomi. His face went pale. You found her. Naomi frowned. What? Michael looked at Alexander. I wondered when someone would finally ask. Alexander stepped forward. Ask what? Michael looked at Naomi. Your father wasn't supposed to lose his job. Naomi's heart stopped. Then why did he? Michael's eyes filled with regret. Because someone wanted the acquisition to happen quickly. Who? Michael looked at Alexander. Your father knew something was wrong. He paused. But he didn't know how deep it went. Alexander's voice was quiet. Who made it happen? Michael swallowed, then said a name. And the name wasn't Richard Voss. It wasn't Alexander's father. It was someone neither Naomi nor Alexander had expected. Someone who had been standing close to both families for years. Someone who had benefited from the destruction. And someone who had never stopped watching Naomi. The past hadn't disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to reveal its final secret. Michael Grant didn't say the name immediately. He stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the edge of the door as though the memory itself had weight. Naomi stared at him. Alexander remained beside her. Who? Alexander asked. Michael looked at him, then at Naomi. Finally, he stepped aside. Come in? They entered. Michael's house was modest, nothing like the Reed estate. There were photographs on the walls, old books on shelves, and stacks of papers arranged carefully across a desk. He motioned toward 2 chairs. They sat. Michael remained standing. I've spent 8 years wondering whether someone would eventually come looking for the truth. Alexander's expression tightened. You knew? I knew enough. Then why didn't you come forward? Michael looked down. Fear. Naomi's voice was quiet. Fear of what? Losing everything. She almost laughed. My father lost everything. Michael closed his eyes. I know. Then why stay silent? Because I was a coward. The bluntness of the answer silenced her. Michael walked toward the desk. I told myself I was protecting my family. He looked at Naomi. I was really protecting myself. Naomi felt a strange chill. It was becoming a familiar theme. People had called silence protection. They had called control responsibility. They had called fear caution. And all of those choices had consequences. Alexander leaned forward. Who was responsible? Michael took a folder from his desk. Her name was Victoria Hale. Naomi frowned. Who is that? Michael looked at Alexander. Your father's former business partner. Alexander froze. My father didn't have a business partner. He did. Michael placed the folder on the table. She operated through several investment companies. Most of them were private. Alexander opened the folder. Inside were financial statements, corporate registrations, transfer records. His eyes narrowed. These companies. They were used to move money out of Hartwell. Naomi looked at the documents. And my father found them? Michael nodded. Daniel discovered irregular vendor payments. Why didn't he report them? He did. Naomi's jaw tightened. To Richard. Yes. And Richard knew. Richard was involved. Alexander looked at the documents. And my father? Michael shook his head. Your father knew something was wrong, but Victoria convinced him the issue was internal politics. Alexander stared at him. She lied to him. Yes. Why? Because your father was preparing to audit the company. Michael's voice became quieter. Victoria knew that if the audit happened, the money trail would lead back to her. Alexander looked up. So she manipulated the acquisition. She manipulated everyone. Naomi leaned forward. Why target my father? Because Daniel was persistent. She nodded. That sounds like him. He wouldn't stop asking questions. Michael looked at her. He also kept copies. Naomi's heart tightened. Copies of what? Everything. Michael opened another folder. He gave some of them to me. Alexander's eyes widened. Where are they? Michael looked toward a locked cabinet. Here. He walked to it. Naomi held her breath. Michael opened the cabinet and pulled out a box. He placed it on the table. The box was old. Dust covered the top. Naomi stared at it. My father kept this? He trusted me to protect it. But you didn't. Michael looked at her. No. She swallowed. You were afraid. Yes. While he was losing everything. Michael lowered his head. Yes. Naomi stared at him. Anger rose inside her. But beneath it was something else. Sadness. Because she understood him. Not his decision, but his fear. She had been afraid too. Alexander had been afraid. Her father had been afraid. Everyone had been afraid. And fear had shaped decisions that affected innocent people. That was one of the most painful lessons Naomi had ever learned. People didn't always make harmful choices because they wanted to hurt someone. Sometimes they made them because they wanted to protect themselves. That didn't make the consequences less real. Michael opened the box. Inside were financial statements, letters, copies of emails, handwritten notes. Naomi picked up one document. Her father's handwriting appeared across the page. Victoria Hale, investigate connection to vendor accounts. Another document showed payments from Hartwell to a private investment company. Then another. The evidence was overwhelming. Alexander looked at Michael. Why didn't my father know? He suspected something. Then why did he proceed? Michael hesitated. Because Victoria convinced him that Daniel was exaggerating. Naomi closed her eyes. Her father had been right, and the people who should have listened hadn't. Alexander looked down at the documents. He felt something inside him breaking. Not because of his father's mistakes, because he finally understood how easily people could be manipulated when they believed they were making rational decisions. His father hadn't been innocent, but he hadn't been the mastermind either. He had trusted the wrong person, and he had failed to verify what Daniel was saying. That failure had cost people years of their lives. Where is Victoria now? Alexander asked. Michael looked at him. She left the country. Where? Switzerland. Alexander frowned. She's still alive? Yes. Doing what? Michael gave him a tired smile. Managing investments. Naomi's eyes widened. She got away? For 8 years. Alexander closed the folder. Not anymore. Naomi looked at him. Alexander, he turned. I know what you're thinking. What? You're going to try to destroy her. He didn't answer. Don't. Alexander frowned. Why? Because this isn't about revenge. She touched the documents. It's about truth. He looked at her. I know. And accountability. I know. Not punishment because you're angry. Alexander took a breath. You're right. He looked back at the evidence. Then we'll do it properly. Michael looked relieved, but Naomi wasn't finished. She looked at him. And you? Michael froze. What about me? You said you were afraid. Yes. Are you still? He swallowed. Yes. Naomi nodded. Then tell the truth anyway. Michael looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. I will. The investigation moved quickly after that. Michael gave a formal statement. The documents were authenticated. Financial investigators reopened the old case. Several former executives were contacted. Victoria Hale's companies came under scrutiny. For Naomi, the process was exhausting. Every new document reopened something. Every interview brought back memories. She began having difficulty sleeping. Some mornings, she woke up angry. Other mornings, she felt nothing. Alexander noticed. But this time, he didn't rush to fix it. He asked, Do you want to talk? Sometimes, she said yes. Sometimes, no. He accepted both. One night, Naomi sat on Alexander's balcony, staring at the city. I thought finding the truth would make me feel better. Alexander sat beside her. I thought the same. It doesn't. No. She rubbed her hands together. I feel angry. That's okay. I feel relieved. That's okay too. I feel guilty for feeling relieved. You don't have to. She looked at him. Why? Because emotions don't have to agree with each other. Naomi smiled faintly. Where did you learn that? From you. She laughed softly. I've been useful. You have. She leaned back. I don't know what healing is supposed to feel like. Alexander looked at her. Maybe it doesn't feel like anything. What do you mean? Maybe it's just noticing that you're reacting differently. Naomi thought about that. You might be right. She had expected herself to collapse after learning everything. Instead, she was still working, still raising Sophie, still living, still loving, still choosing. Maybe that was healing, not forgetting, continuing. One afternoon, Naomi visited her father's grave. She brought flowers. She sat quietly. For a while, she said nothing. Then she whispered, I know now. The wind moved through the trees. I know you weren't weak. Her eyes filled. I know you were trying to protect me. She smiled through tears. And I'm sorry, I spent so many years thinking you failed. She touched the headstone. You didn't. A voice behind her startled her. She turned. Alexander stood several feet away. He hadn't approached. He waited. Naomi smiled. How long have you been there? Not long. You could have come closer. I didn't want to interrupt. She nodded, then moved slightly. He sat beside her. For several minutes, they said nothing. Finally, Naomi asked, Do you think our parents would have liked each other? Alexander smiled. Probably not. She laughed. Why? My father was stubborn. So was mine. My father liked being right. So did mine. My father hated admitting mistakes. So did mine. They looked at each other. Then Naomi said, maybe they were more alike than we thought. Alexander nodded. Maybe. They sat together. There was something peaceful about the moment. Not because the past had become beautiful. It hadn't. It was still painful. But the past no longer had the same power over them. They could remember without being consumed. They could talk without blaming. They could love without pretending nothing had happened. That was progress. A month later, the investigation produced its first major result. Victoria Hale's financial network was formally linked to the Hartwell fraud. Several accounts had been used to move millions. Richard Voss had received payments. Other executives had benefited. Alexander's father had been misled, but had also ignored warnings that should have been investigated. The truth was messy. There was no single villain responsible for everything. There were choices, bad judgment, greed, fear, silence, and people who failed to speak when they should have. Naomi read the final report, then closed it. Alexander sat across from her. How do you feel? She thought about it. Tired, he nodded. Anything else? Free. He smiled. Free? Not completely. She looked at the report. But enough. She reached across the table. Alexander took her hand. I used to think healing meant getting to the point where nothing hurt anymore. He listened. Now I think it means the pain doesn't get to make every decision. Alexander smiled. I like that. So do I. That evening, Alexander made a decision. He had planned to ask Naomi to move in with him. The idea had been growing in his mind for months. But now, he stopped himself. Not because he didn't want it. Because he wanted to ask her without turning the relationship into another rescue. He sat beside her. Can I ask you something? Yes. Would you ever want to live together? Naomi looked at him. He immediately added, you don't have to answer. She smiled. You're learning. I'm trying. She thought about it. Maybe. Alexander nodded. Okay. But not yet. Okay. And I want us to keep separate finances. Absolutely. And I don't want to move because I'm struggling. I understand. I want to move because we're ready. Alexander smiled. When we're ready? She leaned against him. When we're ready? The answer wasn't a rejection. It was something healthier, a boundary, a future possibility, a decision neither of them had to force. That night, Naomi lay awake thinking about the past. She thought about her father, about Alexander's father, about Victoria, about Richard, about the years she'd spent believing that trusting people was dangerous. She realized something. Trust was dangerous. So was love. So was hope. So was vulnerability. But avoiding all of them had a cost too. A life without risk could become a life without connection. She turned toward Alexander. He was asleep. She smiled. She didn't know what the future would bring. She couldn't guarantee that Alexander would never hurt her. He couldn't guarantee that she would never hurt him. But they had learned something important. They didn't need guarantees. They needed honesty. They needed boundaries. They needed patience. And they needed the willingness to repair when they got things wrong. That was enough. For now. But another question remained. Could they build a life together without allowing their pasts to dictate every decision? Because the truth had been uncovered. The guilty people were finally being held accountable. The old wounds had begun to close. Yet Naomi still carried one fear she hadn't fully confronted. She loved Alexander. And loving him meant risking the possibility of losing him. Soon, she would have to decide whether she was ready to take that risk. Not because she had finally become fearless, but because she had finally learned that fear didn't have to be the one making her choices. Naomi had spent most of her life preparing for things to end. She prepared for relationships to fail, jobs to disappear, people to leave, plans to change. She kept emergency savings because she believed something could always go wrong. She kept emotional distance because she believed people eventually disappointed you. She even kept a mental list of everything she could survive alone. It had made her strong. It had also made her tired. Now, for the first time, Naomi was standing in front of a future she actually wanted. And that frightened her more than the past ever had. It was a Tuesday morning when the realization finally came. She was sitting at her desk at work, reviewing a report, when her phone buzzed. A message from Alexander. Dinner tonight? Naomi smiled. She typed, yes. Then she stopped. She stared at the word. Yes. Such a simple answer. But it represented something bigger. She wasn't saying yes because she needed him. She wasn't saying yes because he could make her life easier. She wasn't saying yes because she was afraid of being alone. She was saying yes because she wanted to see him. That distinction mattered. Naomi smiled and sent the message. A few seconds later, his response appeared. "I'll pick you up at 7. She replied. "No, I'll drive." His answer came almost immediately. "Of course you will." She laughed. That was their relationship now. He offered, she chose, and he respected the choice. That evening, Alexander took her to a small restaurant. No photographers, no investors, no business associates, just the two of them. They sat near a window. Naomi looked at him. "You seem relaxed." "I am. That's unusual." "I've been practicing." "Practicing what?" "Not trying to control everything." She smiled. "How's that going?" "Terribly." She laughed. "I appreciate your honesty." He reached for his water. "You?" "I'm learning too." "About?" "Not expecting everything to go wrong." Alexander nodded. "That's harder." "Much harder." Their food arrived. They talked about work. Sophie, the community center. A new project Alexander's foundation was considering. Then Alexander said, "I've been thinking about the future." Naomi's shoulders tightened. He noticed. "I'm not proposing." She laughed. "I wasn't thinking that." "You were." "I absolutely was not." "You look terrified." She smiled. "Maybe a little." He leaned back. "I was thinking about something simpler." "What?" "Where we live." Naomi looked at him. "You want to move?" "No." He smiled. "I want to know what you want." She was quiet. "I don't know." "That's okay." "No." She shook her head. "I actually do." Alexander waited. "I want a home." He smiled. "You have one." "I mean something different." She looked through the window. "Somewhere Sophie can grow up without constantly feeling like we're waiting for the next disaster." Alexander listened. "Somewhere that feels permanent." He didn't interrupt. "I've never allowed myself to think about permanence." "Why?" "Because permanence always sounded like something you could lose." Alexander nodded. "I understand." She looked at him. "I want to build something." "With me?" The question was gentle. Naomi smiled. "Yes." Alexander's expression softened. "But slowly. Very slowly." They laughed. A few days later, Naomi began looking at houses. Not mansions. Not gated estates. Just comfortable family homes in quiet neighborhoods. She wanted a small yard, a good school district, a kitchen large enough for Sophie to make a mess, a guest room, and a space that belonged to her. Alexander went with her once. He didn't offer his opinion unless she asked. That surprised the real estate agent. At one house, the agent looked at Alexander. "What do you think?" Alexander looked at Naomi. "I think you should ask her." Naomi smiled. The agent laughed. "Fair enough." They walked through the rooms. The house was beautiful. But Naomi didn't like the kitchen. She didn't like the neighborhood. She didn't like the way the afternoon light entered the living room. She said no. Alexander didn't question it. They left. In the car, Naomi said, "You didn't try to convince me." "Why would I?" "Because you liked it." "I did." "So?" "So you didn't." She smiled. That simple interaction stayed with her. It was exactly what she had been learning. Love didn't require agreement about everything. It required respect. But the house search also revealed something unexpected. Naomi discovered that she didn't want to move into Alexander's world. She wanted them to create their own. That distinction became important one Saturday afternoon. Alexander suggested a neighborhood near his office. Naomi shook her head. "No." "Why?" "It's too close to your world." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "I don't want our home surrounded by your employees, your security, your business." "Okay." "I don't want Sophie growing up thinking money solves every problem." Alexander nodded. "Fair. And I don't want you becoming the person everyone calls when they need something." He smiled. "That may be impossible. Then we'll need boundaries." He laughed. "You're right." They continued driving. After several minutes, Alexander said, "What about somewhere halfway?" Naomi looked at him. "Halfway? Between your world and mine." She smiled. "I like that." So they kept looking. Then something happened that neither expected. Alexander's company received another offer. A major international firm wanted to acquire one of his most profitable divisions. The offer was enormous. It would make Alexander significantly richer. But it would also mean losing control of a company he had built for nearly 2 decades. His board encouraged him to accept. His advisors encouraged him to accept. His investors encouraged him to accept. Everyone saw the opportunity. Alexander wasn't sure. For the first time, money wasn't the issue. Identity was, who was he if he wasn't the man running everything? He came home late one evening. Naomi was sitting on the balcony. She looked up. Bad day? Complicated. Business? Yes. He sat beside her. He told her about the offer. Naomi listened. When he finished, she asked, "What do you want?" "I don't know." She smiled. "Then don't ask me what you should do." He laughed softly. "I wasn't going to. You were thinking about it." "Maybe." She looked at him. "You've spent your whole life building this." "Yes." "Do you still want it?" He thought carefully. "I want the work. Not the company?" "I don't know." "Then maybe that's the question." Alexander looked at her. "You don't need to decide tonight." "I know." "You can take time." "I know. And whatever you decide, I'll support you." He smiled. "Even if I sell everything?" "No." He raised an eyebrow. She laughed. "I'm kidding." He smiled. "Good. But, seriously." She reached for his hand. "I'll support you if the decision is yours." He looked at her. Not his board's, not his father's, not his investors. His. That was exactly what he needed to hear. 2 weeks later, Alexander declined the full acquisition. Instead, he sold a minority stake and kept control of the company. It wasn't the most profitable option, but it gave him something money couldn't buy. Time. He would no longer have to work 80-hour weeks. He could delegate more. He could spend more time with Sophie. He could be present with Naomi. When the announcement became public, some analysts criticized him. Others praised the decision. Alexander didn't care. For once, he had made a major decision based on the life he wanted rather than the life everyone expected him to maintain. That evening, Naomi hugged him. "You look happy." "I am." "Why?" "Because I finally understand something." "What?" "I don't have to keep proving that I can build something bigger." She smiled. "Good. I can build something better." Her eyes softened. "That's different." "Very." The relationship changed after that. Not dramatically. Quietly. Alexander began leaving the office earlier. Naomi started bringing Sophie to his house for dinner. They began discussing finances openly. Not his money, their money. What would remain separate? What would be shared? How they would handle expenses? How they would protect Sophie's interests? How they would make decisions if they eventually lived together? It wasn't romantic, in the traditional sense, but it was intimate, because they were talking about real life. One evening, Naomi opened a spreadsheet. Alexander looked at it. "What is that?" "Our future budget." He laughed. "You made a spreadsheet?" "Of course." "You're terrifying." "Thank you." They sat together. They discussed numbers, mortgage, utilities, education, savings, travel, emergency funds. Alexander suggested something. Naomi rejected it. She suggested something. Alexander disagreed. They discussed it. Neither became defensive. At the end, they had a plan. Not perfect, but theirs. And Naomi realized that this was what healthy love looked like. It wasn't two people becoming one person. It was two whole people building something without destroying their individuality. Then Sophie asked the question that changed everything. It happened during dinner. She looked at Alexander. "Are you going to marry Mom?" Naomi nearly dropped her fork. Alexander coughed. Sophie looked confused. "What?" Naomi stared at her daughter. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you love each other." Alexander looked at Naomi. Naomi looked back. Sophie continued eating. "You should." Naomi laughed nervously. "That's not how it works." "Why?" "Because adults have to decide." "You are adults." Alexander laughed. "Technically, she's right." Naomi gave him a warning look. He smiled. Sophie shrugged. "Okay." Then she returned to her food. But Naomi couldn't stop thinking about it. Marriage, the word itself, felt heavy. Not because she didn't want it, because she did. And wanting something made it possible to lose it. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Naomi and Alexander sat in the living room. Neither mentioned marriage. Eventually, Alexander said, "Are you okay?" Naomi smiled. "Yes." "You're thinking." "Yes." "About what?" She looked at him. "Marriage." Alexander didn't react immediately. Then he nodded. "I figured." "I'm scared." "Me too." She looked surprised. "You?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I don't want to make a promise I can't keep." Naomi's eyes softened. "What would you promise?" "Not perfection." "Good." "Not that we'll never hurt each other." "Good." "Not that life will always be easy." "Good." He reached for her hand. "I'd promise to keep choosing honesty." Naomi squeezed his fingers. I could live with that. They didn't decide anything that night, and that was okay. They were learning that not every important question needed an immediate answer. A month later, Naomi found herself standing in front of the house they eventually chose. It wasn't Alexander's, it wasn't hers. It was theirs. At least, it could be. 3 bedrooms, a modest yard, a bright kitchen, a quiet street, a small room Sophie immediately claimed as her own. Naomi stood in the doorway. Alexander waited beside her. What do you think? She looked around. I like it. Just like it? She smiled. I love it. He smiled. Naomi walked into the kitchen. She imagined breakfast here. Sophie doing homework, arguments over dishes, friends visiting, Christmas mornings, bad days, good days, ordinary days, a real life, not a fantasy. She turned to Alexander. I'm ready. He looked at her. Ready for what? To build a life. His expression softened. With me? She smiled. With you. He reached for her hand. This time, there was no hesitation. But as they stood together inside the empty house, Naomi felt one last fear rise. Not about money, not about her father, not about Alexander, about herself. Could she love this life without constantly waiting for it to disappear? Could she finally allow happiness to exist without preparing for its ending? She didn't know, but she knew something else. She didn't have to answer that question before moving forward. She could learn, slowly, one day at a time. And perhaps that was the final lesson she had been searching for. Healing wasn't becoming certain that nothing bad would ever happen. Healing was becoming confident that if something did happen, you would still know who you were. Naomi looked at Alexander. He smiled. And for once, she didn't look for the exit. She looked toward the future. The house was empty, except for the sound of their footsteps. Naomi walked from room to room slowly. She opened the closet in the bedroom, looked through the kitchen cabinets, stood in the backyard. She imagined Sophie running through the grass. She imagined herself sitting on the porch after a long day. She imagined Alexander coming home from work. She imagined arguments, laughter, bills, birthdays, bad moods, ordinary Tuesdays. That was what made her love the house. It didn't feel like a fantasy. It felt like real life. And real life was exactly what she wanted. Alexander stood in the doorway. You've been quiet. I'm thinking. Good thoughts? She smiled. Mostly. Mostly? She turned toward him. I'm thinking about how strange this is. What? I spent years convinced I'd never live with anyone again. Alexander's expression softened. And now? Now I'm standing in an empty house with a billionaire asking me to build a life with him. He laughed. When you say it like that, I sound intimidating. You are. Fair. She walked closer. But you're also just Alexander. He smiled. Just Alexander. She reached for his hand. That's the version I love. His expression changed. She had said it before, but this time, there was no hesitation, no fear hiding behind the words. Just truth. I love you too, he said. She smiled. They stood together in the empty living room. No music, no flowers, no dramatic proposal. Just 2 people holding hands. And somehow, it felt more meaningful than anything elaborate could have been. They didn't move in immediately. Naomi insisted on waiting. Alexander agreed. They wanted Sophie to adjust. They wanted Naomi to finish settling into her new job. They wanted the house to feel like a choice, rather than an escape. So they spent the next 2 months preparing. Furniture was chosen together. Nothing was bought without discussing it. Alexander occasionally suggested something expensive. Naomi usually rejected it. Do we need that? No. Then we don't need it. He laughed. You've become ruthless. I'm protecting our budget. Our budget? She smiled. Yes. He liked hearing that. Not because of the money, because it meant she was beginning to think of them as a team. But Naomi never stopped maintaining her own accounts. She never stopped working. She never stopped making decisions. And Alexander never asked her to. They were learning how to combine their lives without erasing the people they had been before they met. One afternoon, Naomi sat with Sophie in her new bedroom. The walls were still mostly empty. Sophie was drawing possible decorations. Mom? Yes? Are we really moving? Yes. With Alexander? Yes. Sophie smiled. Good. Naomi laughed. You really like him. He's nice. That's all? He makes pancakes. Naomi smiled. That is a very important qualification. Sophie nodded seriously. Then she became quiet. Will you still be my mom? Naomi's heart tightened. Of course. Even when you live with him? Naomi put down the box she was holding. She sat beside her daughter. Nothing changes that. Sophie nodded. Okay. And if you ever feel uncomfortable, confused, or worried, you tell me. Okay? You don't have to pretend everything is fine. Sophie looked at her. Like you? Naomi smiled. Exactly like me. Sophie laughed. Naomi hugged her. It was a small conversation, but it reminded Naomi of something important. Healing wasn't only about her relationship with Alexander. It was about the example she was setting for her daughter. She didn't want Sophie growing up believing love meant disappearing into someone else. She wanted her to understand that a healthy relationship allowed both people to remain whole. Alexander had his own conversation that week. With Claire, they sat in his office after a long board meeting. So, you're really moving? Eventually. Claire smiled. Never thought I'd see the day. Neither did I. How's business? Better. How's life? Alexander thought about it. Better. Claire leaned back. You're working less. Yes. You sold part of the company. Yes. You're taking weekends off. Sometimes. She smiled. And you're happy. Alexander nodded. I am. Claire studied him. Do you know why? He thought for a moment. Because I'm no longer trying to prove that I'm worthy of what I have. She nodded. That's a big change. I used to think success meant never needing anyone. And now? I think success is having something worth coming home to. Claire smiled. She changed you. Alexander shook his head. No. He looked toward the window. She gave me a reason to change. The move finally came. There were boxes everywhere. Sophie complained about packing. Naomi complained about tape. Alexander tried to organize everything. Naomi told him to stop. You are not creating a spreadsheet for moving boxes. I already did. She stared at him. You did what? He looked embarrassed. It's efficient. She burst out laughing. You're impossible. I know. They spent the day carrying boxes. At one point, Alexander dropped a lamp. Sophie gasped. Alexander! I'm fine. Naomi looked at the broken lamp. That's not what I'm worried about. What? That was my lamp. He laughed. She laughed. Even Sophie joined. It was messy. Nothing went according to plan. And Naomi loved every minute, because there was something beautiful about ordinary chaos. No one was trying to impress anyone. They were simply building a home. That first night, the house was quiet. Most of the boxes were still unpacked. Sophie was asleep. Naomi stood in the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of tea. Alexander walked in. How are you feeling? She looked around. Overwhelmed. Me too. Happy. Me too. Terrified. He smiled. Me too. She laughed softly. They sat at the kitchen island. For a while, they said nothing. Then Naomi looked at him. Can I tell you something? Of course. I used to think the worst thing that could happen was being abandoned. Alexander listened. Now I think the worst thing would be abandoning myself. He nodded. That's why I wanted to do this slowly. I know. I needed to know that I could love you and still be me. Alexander reached across the counter. You are still you. I know, and I don't want another version. She smiled. Good. He squeezed her hand. I don't need you smaller so I can feel bigger. Naomi's eyes filled. And I don't need you weaker so I can feel safe. They looked at each other. There it was. The heart of everything they had learned. Neither needed to rescue the other. Neither needed to dominate. Neither needed to disappear. They simply needed to stand beside each other. But life didn't suddenly become easy. The following month, Naomi and Alexander had their first major argument after moving in. It was over something completely ordinary. Laundry. Alexander had forgotten to move clothes from the washer to the dryer. Naomi discovered them hours later. You forgot again. I'll do it. You said that yesterday. I was busy. So was I. He looked at her. Naomi, it's laundry. She immediately became defensive. That's not the point. What is the point? The point is that I feel like I'm carrying everything again. Alexander stared at her. That's not fair. Maybe. I've been working late. I know. And I help with Sophie. I know. Then why are you acting like I don't contribute? She went quiet. Because the truth was uncomfortable. She wasn't angry about the laundry. She was afraid. Afraid that little things would become big things. Afraid that eventually she'd be doing everything again. Afraid that she'd become invisible inside the relationship. Alexander noticed her expression change. This isn't about laundry. She shook her head. No. What is it? I don't know. He waited. She finally said, "I'm scared." He nodded. "Okay. I don't want to become the woman who does everything while telling herself she's fine." "You won't. You can't promise that." "You're right." She looked at him. "But I can promise that if you tell me you're overwhelmed, I'll listen." Naomi's shoulders relaxed. "And I'll do the same." He nodded. They moved the laundry together. It wasn't romantic, but it was important. Because healthy relationships weren't built by never arguing. They were built by learning how to recognize what an argument was really about. Sometimes laundry was laundry. Sometimes laundry was fear. Sometimes silence was exhaustion. Sometimes silence was resentment. The skill was learning the difference. Months passed. The investigation into Hartwell continued. Victoria Hale eventually returned to the United States through legal proceedings. She faced serious financial and civil consequences. Richard Voss cooperated partially in exchange for consideration in his own case. Several former executives were held accountable. The final findings confirmed that Alexander's father had made serious mistakes but had not orchestrated the entire scheme. He had trusted people he shouldn't have trusted. He had failed to act quickly enough. That didn't erase his responsibility, but it also didn't make him the villain Naomi had once imagined. The truth was complicated, just like people, just like love. Naomi visited her father's grave one final time after the investigation ended. Alexander went with her. She placed flowers on the stone. "I used to wish I could change everything." Alexander stood beside her. "Do you still?" She thought about it. "No." "Why?" "Because changing the past would mean changing who I became." She looked at him. "And I like who I am now." Alexander smiled. She continued. "I wish Dad had gotten justice sooner. He deserved it. I wish he hadn't carried everything alone." Alexander nodded. "Me too." Naomi looked at the grave. "But I can't change that." She took Alexander's hand. "I can only choose what I do with it." They stood quietly. Then Naomi whispered, "Goodbye, Dad." And for the first time, the goodbye didn't feel like surrender. It felt like release. 1 year after the day Alexander helped Naomi beside the highway, they returned to the same road. They weren't planning to. They had been driving somewhere else when Naomi recognized the exit. She looked at him. "Pull over." Alexander laughed. "Why?" "I want to see something." He pulled over. They stepped out. The place looked different. The construction work was finished. Traffic moved normally. No abandoned car. No rain. No emergency lights. Just an ordinary road. Naomi stood where her car had once stopped. "I can't believe it's been a year." Alexander smiled. "Me neither." She looked at him. "Do you remember what you said?" "Probably something wise." She laughed. "You said, you don't have to be strong every minute." He nodded. "I meant it. I didn't believe you." "I know," she smiled. "But I do now." Alexander reached for her hand. She took it. "Do you regret stopping that day?" She asked. "Never." "Even though it changed everything?" "Especially because it changed everything." Naomi looked at the road. "A year ago, I thought I was just having a terrible day." "You were," she smiled. "But sometimes terrible days are just beginnings we don't recognize." Alexander nodded. "That's true." That evening, they returned home. Sophie was waiting. "Where were you?" "We went somewhere." "Where?" Naomi looked at Alexander. "The place where we met." Sophie smiled. "That's romantic." Naomi laughed. "Maybe." Sophie ran upstairs. Naomi and Alexander remained in the kitchen. He opened a cabinet. "Do you know what today is?" "Tuesday." "Exactly." She laughed. "That's not what I meant." He reached into the cabinet and pulled out a small box. Naomi froze. "Alexander." He looked nervous. For perhaps the first time in his life, the billionaire looked genuinely uncertain. "I don't have a speech." She smiled. "Good. I don't want to promise you perfection." "Good. I don't want to promise you that we'll never hurt each other." "Good. I don't want to promise that life will always be easy." She nodded. "Good." He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring. Nothing excessive. Nothing designed to prove his wealth. Just a ring. "I want to promise that I'll keep learning how to love you better." Naomi's eyes filled. "I want to promise that I'll listen when you're hurting." He continued. "I'll respect your independence." He took a breath. "And when I get it wrong, I'll try to repair it instead of defending myself." Naomi laughed through her tears. "That's a very Alexander proposal." He smiled. "Is that a yes?" She looked at the ring. Then at him. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. She leaned forward and kissed him. Not because everything was perfect, because it wasn't. Because they had learned enough to know that love wasn't perfection. It was practice, choice, honesty, boundaries, patience, repair, and the courage to remain yourself while making room for another person. Later that night, Naomi stood on the balcony. Alexander joined her. She looked at the ring. I still get scared. I know. Sometimes, I still wonder what could go wrong. So do I. She smiled. But I don't want fear to decide anymore. Alexander took her hand. It doesn't have to. She leaned against him. Behind them, their home was quiet. Not perfect, not finished. There were still boxes in one room. The sink needed cleaning. Sophie had left books across the hallway. Tomorrow, there would be bills. Work, responsibilities, arguments, laughter, life, real life. And Naomi finally understood something. She hadn't needed Alexander to rescue her from her past. He hadn't needed her to complete him. They hadn't healed each other. They had simply created a relationship where healing was allowed to happen without shame, where mistakes could be admitted, where boundaries could be respected, where love didn't demand surrender. And perhaps that was the most honest kind of happy ending. Not nothing will ever hurt again. But, if something hurts, we will face it together without losing ourselves. Naomi looked at Alexander. I love you. He smiled. I love you too. She looked toward the city, then back at the home they had built. A home created not from rescue, but from choice. And for the first time in her life, Naomi wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. She was simply living. And that, more than anything, was how she knew she had healed. 1 year after Alexander proposed, Naomi still had moments when she expected everything to fall apart. It happened less often, but it happened. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night and listen to the quiet house. She would hear Sophie breathing in the next room. She would hear Alexander moving downstairs. And for a few seconds, her mind would whisper, something is going to happen. She had lived so long in anticipation of loss that peace sometimes felt suspicious. But now she knew what to do. She didn't panic. She didn't withdraw. She didn't create a problem simply because she was afraid one might appear. She breathed. Then she asked herself, what is actually happening right now? Usually the answer was simple. Nothing. The morning of their wedding was surprisingly ordinary. There were no helicopters, no magazine photographers, no extravagant celebrity guest list. Alexander could have turned the event into the most expensive wedding anyone in their circle had ever seen. Instead, Naomi had insisted on something smaller. Family, close friends, people who had been there before the money and after the money. People who knew them as individuals rather than as a billionaire, and the woman whose past had become connected to his. Naomi stood in front of the mirror. Her dress was elegant but simple. Sophie stood behind her. You look beautiful. Naomi smiled. Thank you. Sophie adjusted a small piece of fabric. Are you nervous? Very. Why? Because it's a big day. Sophie thought about it. You're already living with him. Naomi laughed. That's true. So what's different? Naomi looked at herself in the mirror. Today, I'm making a promise. Sophie nodded. Are you scared he'll leave? Naomi's smile faded slightly. Sometimes. Sophie looked at her. Are you going to be okay? Naomi turned toward her daughter. Yes. How do you know? Naomi knelt. Because whether he stays or leaves, I'll still be me. Sophie smiled. That's good. Naomi hugged her. Very good. And in that moment, Naomi realized how much had changed. A year ago, she would have answered differently. She might have said, because Alexander won't leave. Now she understood the difference. She couldn't guarantee what another person would do. She could only know who she would be. That was security, not certainty about someone else. Confidence in yourself. Across town, Alexander stood in front of his mirror. His suit was ready. His tie wasn't. He had tried 3 times. His best friend Marcus walked in. You look terrified. Alexander glanced at him. I'm not. You've been fixing that tie for 10 minutes. I like it perfect. Marcus laughed. That's the problem. Alexander looked at himself. She makes me nervous. Good. Why? Because you're finally doing something you can't control. Alexander smiled. You're right. Marcus adjusted the tie. There. Thanks. He looked at his reflection. Then his expression became serious. Do you think I'm ready? Marcus stared at him. For what? Marriage. Marcus smiled. You've been living with her for a year. I know. You're raising Sophie together. I know. You've already been through financial crises, family secrets, lawsuits, trust issues and arguments over laundry. Alexander laughed. That's true. Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. You don't need to be ready for everything. What do I need to be ready for? To keep choosing her. Alexander nodded. That was enough. The ceremony was held in a small garden. No grand stage. No excessive decorations. Just flowers, chairs, trees and sunlight. Naomi walked toward Alexander. He looked at her. For a moment, everything else disappeared. He remembered the first time he saw her beside the highway. Tired, frustrated, trying to fix a broken car while carrying the weight of a life nobody else could see. He had thought he was helping a stranded woman. He hadn't known he was meeting the person who would teach him that money couldn't solve everything. Naomi looked at him. She remembered the man who had approached her that day. She had been suspicious, annoyed, uncomfortable. She hadn't trusted him. Now she was walking toward him voluntarily. Not because she needed rescue, because she had chosen him. That distinction made her heart full. When it was time for their vows, Alexander spoke first. I used to believe love meant protecting someone from everything painful. He glanced at Naomi. I thought if I had enough money, enough knowledge, enough influence, I could make life easier for the people I loved. A few people smiled. Naomi did too. But you taught me that love isn't taking someone's problems away. His voice softened. Sometimes love is sitting beside someone while they solve their own problems. Naomi's eyes filled. Sometimes it's listening. He continued. Sometimes it's stepping back. He took a breath. And sometimes it's admitting that I don't know what to do. Naomi laughed softly through her tears. I promise to keep learning. He looked directly at her. I promise to respect the woman you were before me, the woman you are today, and the woman you will become. Naomi smiled. I love you. He smiled. I love you too. Then it was Naomi's turn. She took a breath. I used to believe that independence meant never needing anyone. She looked at Alexander. I thought if I could handle everything alone, nobody could disappoint me. Her voice trembled. But I learned that protecting yourself from every possible hurt also protects you from being truly known. Alexander's eyes softened. You didn't save me. She paused. And I didn't save you. A small smile passed between them. We learned to stand beside each other. She continued. I promise not to disappear when I'm afraid. Alexander's expression changed. I promise to speak, instead of assuming. She looked at him. I promise to keep my own voice. Then she squeezed his hands. And I promise to make room for yours. There were tears in the audience. Sophie was crying openly. Naomi smiled at her, then returned her attention to Alexander. I don't promise that I'll never be afraid. She took a breath. But I promise I won't let fear make every decision for me. Alexander nodded. I can live with that. They laughed. The officiant smiled. Then I think we have a marriage. Everyone laughed. After the ceremony, Naomi and Alexander stepped away from the guests. They stood beneath a tree. Naomi looked at her ring. How does it feel? Alexander smiled. Strange. Good strange? Very good. She leaned against him. Are you happy? Yes. You sure? He smiled. Yes. She laughed. Good. They stood quietly. Then Naomi said, Do you remember the first thing you ever said to me? Alexander thought. Something about your car? No. What? You said, you don't have to be strong every minute. He smiled. And you said? I told you I was fine. You were lying. I was. They laughed. Naomi looked toward the garden. I wasn't fine. I know. But I am now. Alexander shook his head. Not because I fixed you. No. She looked at him. Because I finally stopped believing I needed to be fixed. That sentence stayed between them. It was the heart of everything. Their marriage didn't become perfect. 3 months later, they had an argument about work. Alexander accepted a major project without discussing the schedule with Naomi. She was furious. Not because he took the project. Because he had forgotten how much his absence affected the family. They argued. Then they stopped. They talked. Alexander admitted he had slipped into old habits. Naomi admitted she had assumed he didn't care before asking him why he made the decision. They apologized. They adjusted. The project continued. But Alexander changed his schedule. Naomi changed hers too. Not because one person won. Because both understood that marriage required negotiation. 6 months later, Naomi received a promotion. She was now leading a major division at her company. Her first instinct was to celebrate alone. Then she realized something. She wanted to tell Alexander. Not because she needed his approval, because she wanted to share the joy. When she called him, he answered. I got promoted. He laughed. I knew it. She immediately protested. "You can't say that." He laughed harder. "Sorry, I'm serious." "Okay." She smiled. "I did it myself." "I know." "Good. I'm proud of you." She closed her eyes. "Thank you." They celebrated that evening. Alexander didn't buy her anything. Instead, he cooked. Badly. She laughed. But they ate together. And somehow, that meant more. Sophie grew older. She became more confident, more curious, more outspoken. One afternoon, she asked Naomi, "Why did you marry Alexander?" Naomi thought about it. "Because I love him." "That's it?" "No." She smiled. "I trust him. Even though he makes mistakes. Especially because he knows how to admit them." Sophie thought about that. "Does he ever make you angry?" "Of course." "Then why stay?" Naomi smiled. "Because being angry doesn't mean the relationship is bad." "What does?" "Being unable to talk about the anger." Sophie nodded slowly. Naomi continued, "Healthy love isn't about never hurting each other." "Then what is it?" "Learning how to repair." Sophie smiled. "Like fixing something." Naomi laughed. "Sort of." She paused. "But remember this." "What?" "People aren't broken machines." Sophie looked curious. "Then what are they?" "People." Naomi kissed her forehead. "People who are always learning." Years later, Naomi would still remember the first day she met Alexander. Not because it was romantic. It wasn't. She had been stranded. She had been tired. She had been irritated. She hadn't wanted help. And Alexander hadn't known what his decision to stop would eventually mean. He thought he was helping someone with a broken car. He didn't know he was about to meet a woman who would challenge every assumption he had about love. Naomi thought she was accepting help from a stranger. She didn't know she was meeting a man who would eventually teach her that accepting help didn't make her weak. Neither had arrived at that moment looking for love, and perhaps that was why it worked. There was no perfect timing, no perfect people, no perfect circumstances. Just two imperfect people meeting at the right moment. One evening, years after their wedding, Naomi and Alexander sat on the porch of their home. Sophie was away at college. The house was quieter now. Naomi held a cup of tea. Alexander sat beside her. "You ever think about how different everything could have been?" Naomi smiled. "All the time." "What if I hadn't stopped that day?" "I would have eventually fixed the car." "Probably." "What if you hadn't?" "I'd still be driving." They laughed. Then Naomi looked at him. "What if we hadn't met?" Alexander was quiet. "I don't know." "Neither do I." She rested her head against his shoulder. "But I'm glad we did." He kissed the top of her head. "Me too." The evening breeze moved through the trees. The world was quiet. And Naomi realized something. She no longer needed to imagine every possible disaster. She no longer needed to prepare for abandonment. She no longer needed to prove that she could survive alone. She knew she could. That was the difference. She had learned that loving someone didn't make her less independent. It gave her another person with whom she could share the journey. Alexander had learned the same. His wealth hadn't disappeared. His problems hadn't disappeared. Neither had Naomi's fears. But none of those things controlled them anymore. They had learned to live with uncertainty. They had learned to apologize. They had learned to ask. They had learned to say no. They had learned to say yes. They had learned that love could survive disagreement. They had learned that boundaries weren't rejection. They had learned that independence wasn't isolation. And most importantly, they had learned that people don't need to be fixed before they deserve love. Sometimes they simply need to be seen, heard, respected, and given room to grow. Naomi looked at Alexander. "Are you happy?" He smiled. "Yes." "Why?" He thought for a moment. "Because I don't have to save you." She smiled. "And I don't have to save you." They laughed. Then she reached for his hand. They sat there together as the sun disappeared. Not perfect, not fearless, not finished, just together. And for both of them, that was enough. Because the greatest lesson their love had taught them was simple. Healthy love doesn't ask, "How can I fix you?" It asks, "How can I stand beside you while you become who you're meant to be?" And sometimes the most beautiful ending isn't a life without pain. It's a life where pain no longer decides who you become. Before we close Naomi and Alexander's story, I want you to think about one question. Can you truly love someone without trying to fix them? Naomi learned that independence doesn't mean refusing help. Alexander learned that love doesn't mean controlling someone's life or solving every problem for them. Sometimes the healthiest kind of love is simply saying, "I see you, I respect you, I won't try to change you, I'll stand beside you while you grow. So tell me in the comments, what was the biggest lesson you learned from Naomi and Alexander's journey? Was it trust, forgiveness, boundaries, independence, patience, or learning to love without control? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson for more emotional American love stories filled with powerful life lessons. And if you've stayed with us from the very beginning to this final chapter, thank you. Remember, you don't have to be perfect to deserve love. You don't have to be completely healed to be worthy of happiness. And you don't have to lose yourself to love someone else. Until the next story, take care of your heart and never forget your worth.